What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. He had lost. The moment his god thread had been broken, Don Quixote Doflamingo knew that he had been defeated. His only hope now was to survive the full brunt of Monkey D. Luffy's King Kong gun, a task that was beginning to prove very difficult. Bringing his haki to its utmost limit, Daffy was able to bear the initial pain and impact of Luffy's attack, at least at first. After what seemed like an eternity, Daffy's body had finally reached Dressrosa, and proceeded to tear straight through the small kingdom. He could feel the stone and dirt below him crumble and fold around him, driving him deeper into the earth and closer to the secret underground facilities beneath Dressrosa. Even though he could feel his former kingdom split apart from his impact, his momentum showed no signs of slowing down. Eventually, his back met steel as it reached his underground operations and the steel tore like paper. The pain at this point was excruciating and it took all he had to maintain consciousness and keep his haki up to protect him from the debris. He could feel his focus waning as his body was assailed by torn metal, and for just a moment, his focus broke, his haki fell. A piercing pain formed in his chest and everything turned to black. Daffy's eyes began to open ever so slightly. As he awoke, he slowly starts to notice the several Marines around him, scurrying with medical supplies. Wondering why, Daffy looks around until he remembers what had happened moments ago, finally noticing a steel support beam lodged into his chest. His body felt numb. He tried desperately to use his devil fruit to try and repair some of the major damage, but it was impossible, the damage was too great. The Marines were trying their hardest to keep him alive to bring him into custody, but he already knew his life was escaping him. The captain of the Don Quixote pirates began to chuckle lightly. For 30 years, he had dedicated his life to destroying everything the celestial dragons cared about. For 30 years, he and his family had grown and thrived to be where they stood up until this day. 30 years of his life, and it was ended by an idiot in a straw hat that couldn't find his way out of a wet paper bag. He would cry if it wasn't so funny or even possible at this point. He could feel his vision fading, his limbs losing even the numbness they once held and now felt as if they were disappearing. He was about to die. Trebol, Diamante, Pica, Virgo, he thought, picturing them in his mind. The people who had come to raise him, the person who was his childhood friend, the ones who had become his family and the ones that he had failed. I'm sorry, he thought, darkness taking over his vision, until he decided to finally close his eyes, a small smile replacing his usual manic grin. It was then that Don Quixote Doflamingo, the heavenly demon and captain of the Don Quixote pirates, had died. Don Quixote Doflamingo did not think much of the afterlife when he was alive, but even he had thought of what waited for him at the end of his days. Whatever he had expected, be it fire and brimstone or an endless existence in purgatory, this was not something that he imagined. Daffy found himself surrounded by darkness, yes, but there was more. It was like he was in some form of cocoon, a barrier of warmth that wrapped around him protectively. He found it almost impossible to move his body and, speaking of his body, it felt off, disproportioned and more importantly incredibly weak. Where was he? He took a moment to relax his mind and concentrate, to listen. He could feel and hear his own heartbeat. A good sign but also confusing. Did I survive, he thought. Were the Marines' medics able to somehow save him? No, that was impossible. The amount of damage he sustained was too severe and the one who bore the heal fruit would never try and save his life. Putting that issue aside, he continued to concentrate, listening past his own heartbeat. After a moment he began to hear another, one separate from his own. This was odd, especially because the heartbeat sounded like it came from all around him. Not bothering with trying to solve this mystery quite yet, he decided to use his haki to sense his surroundings. As soon as he attempted this, he had felt a wave of exhaustion hit him, only letting him use it for a moment, but it had worked. He had felt a few auras around him, but what he had found confused him. One aura, he could sense several feet away from him and it was powerful, clearly belonging to a seasoned warrior. There was another aura, not as strong but still fierce. This one, along with another, confused him. This aura was all around him, it was large and surrounded him completely as if he were inside its owner. Now, Daffy was not a fool. He had many years of experience dealing with the most cunning minds in all the New World, so it should not be surprising that he had an idea of what had happened to him and where he currently was. Single quote. I'm an infant? This revelation was one of both shock and slight amusement. First that Straw Hat Boy kills me and now I'm an infant. Well, a fetus really, but still, the very thought made him laugh hollowly in his mind. But there was one more mystery to solve, one more aura that his Haki could sense. Its nature and location confused him, however. It was unlike anything he had ever encountered, powerful, overwhelmingly powerful, and evil, sickeningly so. It felt like it was right next to him, yet, at the same time, locked away in a place he could never reach. Now that he felt it for the first time, its presence was just there. Whatever it was, he could feel it, just behind that incomprehensible barrier. And now that he could feel it, now that he could sense its rage, he knew that it was watching him, that it knew he was watching it, and it did not like being watched. However, the mind of Don Quixote Doflamingo, the heavenly demon, simply grinned. Life within the womb, Daffy had learned, was very boring and disorienting. There was little to do while trapped there and time seemed almost non-existent. But he knew that time was passing, his body had continued to grow, growing stronger if only marginally so, and soon he would be free. The thoughts of freedom brought other thoughts as well. Where and when would he be in his new life? Would he find himself flung into the far future? Would he still have the opportunity to get his revenge on the celestial dragons? These thoughts had plagued Daffy for most of his time in his new home. There was also what he began to call the entity that lived with him and his new mother. He would continue to watch and observe it and found something interesting. The entity was releasing some form of energy into his mother's body. This energy was thus flowing into him as well. When he felt it, it seemed wild, almost primal in a sense, with that same feeling of maliciousness that the entity exuded if watered down. As far as he could tell, it was not harmful and he had no way of stopping it either way. He continued to examine this energy as time went on and discovered that his mother also had something similar. Unlike the entities, hers was warmer, calmer almost, and somewhat soothing if he had to admit it. What was really interesting was how they interacted. With the help of his Haki, that would still take up a lot of his stamina, he found that his mother's energy seemed to be almost shackling the others, controlling and mitigating it. After discovering this, he looked into himself, so to speak, and discovered that he contained his own energy as well, separate from the one supplied to him by the entity and his mother. Not that he could really do anything with it though. He mostly spent his time examining these various energies, trying to kill his utter boredom. As time passed, he began to feel it. His body had been growing and his prison was growing smaller and smaller. His limbs were now capable of small movements and he knew now that it wouldn't be long. While in this near timeless place he had time to think. Before, he relied on his family to do many things for him, though they did it happily of course. He was stronger than the rest of his family, yes that was true, but that was not because of any considerable effort. Daffy, after coming out of his childhood, had been stronger than most around him. He rarely trained his body and hardly ever practiced his techniques, there was no need to. He had his family to do most things for him and he was superior to most of the scum of the world anyways. That was how he had always thought, and then Straw Hat Luffy had proved him wrong in both the worst and best way possible. In this new life, there would be a new Doflamingo. One who would fight to get everything he would ever need with his own two hands. One who would not know, who could not rely on his family to do things for him. The cage around him had suddenly tightened around him. It was time. A brand new Don Quixote Doflamingo would emerge in this new world, and usher in a new age. He hated this. This entire process was uncomfortable, humiliating, and if he didn't have so much pride he would say a little scary. Daffy was completely helpless as his 9-month prison tightened and squeezed him, pushing him further to his exit. He didn't know long his torture lasted, but eventually he could finally see it, light. Just a moment later a wave of frigid air assaulted him, but he didn't care, he was free. The light and chilly air disoriented him for a moment, but eventually he felt himself wrapped in what was presumably a blanket. He opened his eyes but could only make out the outlines of shapes and various colors. There was no definition and the world was a blurry mess. He felt himself being carried and eventually placed in front of who he assumed to be his mother's face. He strained his senses, trying to make out anything familiar around him. His ears could hear what sounded like speech, but it sounded almost garbled, he just couldn't make out the words. His eyesight was also still limited. He looked up to view his new mother's face but could barely make anything out except the distinct color of red. He really hoped it was just her hair. His first mother died rather early on in his life, and it would be rather saddening to lose another so quickly. A moment later he was carried a bit further away from his mother. Suddenly, he heard what he easily recognizes as a scream come from the nurse currently carrying him, another pair of arms quickly grabbing him as the nurse fell. Startled, he saw a hand raised threateningly above him through his blurry vision. He tried to see who it belonged to but couldn't. He could hear his new retainer speaking to someone, his mother or father perhaps, when they suddenly flung him into the air. The world swayed around him as he was disoriented, then he felt someone catch him. He activated his haki, attempting to identify the aura of his attacker, but something very odd happened just before he did. The various colors around him changed in an instant, and he could now feel a slight breeze where before the air was still. His haki, short-lived that it was, could now only sense the person carrying him, who he had recognized as his father during his time in his mother's womb, with no trace of his attacker. His use of haki had quickly drained his stamina and he could feel sleep already approaching his small body. Once again, his surroundings had suddenly changed, and he could feel his father place him down onto a soft surface, a bed. He tried desperately to stay awake and was successful for a few minutes. Soon after he felt someone else, someone much larger than him, being placed in his bed, the distinct color of red returning. His mother laid next to him, cradling him in his arms, and a moment later sleep had finally took him. He awoke again, his eyes revealing a still blurry world, but it was clearer than before. He was laying in some sort of crib and there were two others standing over him. He looked at them, seeing that distinct color of red, his mother, and a brilliant gold, most likely his father. There was something else, the entity. He could feel it just behind his parents. Looking past them, he saw a mountain of reddish-orange, in a form he wasn't able to make out. It was filled with a hate he was now very familiar with. It was then that he noticed it, a nail, or more accurately a single claw piercing through both his parents' bodies, inching closer and closer to him. He could hear his parents speaking, but his ears refused to translate the cacophony of noise aside from the entity's roars of anger. Then, suddenly, he felt a burning sensation in his stomach, and energy being poured into him that he easily recognized to belong to the monster that had just killed his new parents. Its power flowed into him, and when it stopped his eyes began to close and he welcomed some much-needed rest. It had been quite some time since the date of his birth. In that time, he was able to learn his new name, Naruto Uzumaki. It was rather pitiful compared to Don Quixote da Flamingo, but it would have to do. He found himself now being raised in an orphanage, having never seen his parents after his first day in this new world. He was still under the age of 1 year old, or so he thought. Time was still quite hard to keep track of, but at least now he knew when it was night or daytime. He estimated he was at around 6 months now. His sight and hearing were now significantly better, and he was capable of standing on his own if he had something to lean on. He was able to crawl as well when his caregivers gave him the opportunity. Speaking of his caregivers, he found them quite odd. There were 3 different women working at the orphanage. They took care of him as well as any other child, but with a strange sense of detachment, like it was just a job to be done. Now, while that is technically true, they only had this quirk when it came to him. The other children they treated as if they were their own. The looks they gave him were reminiscent of a different past he was never able to forget. Despite these issues, Daffy, or rather Naruto now, quickly began a routine to further himself as quickly as he could. He would crawl and perform small exercises to help develop his body and practice talking when no one was around. It wouldn't do to have adults hear a 6-month-old speaking words it shouldn't yet know. He was able to use his observation haki much more efficiently now as well, though he never tried using the other 2 types. Sadly, it seemed that his devil fruit was now lost to him, as no matter how hard he tried he was never able to conjure his beloved strains. Furthermore, he had continued to investigate the energy that he discovered early on in his new life. He could feel the entity's energy still, but it seemed almost muted, trickling into him from somewhere he couldn't identify. The beast itself seemed to be almost asleep, no longer aware and watching him as it did when he first arrived in this new world. His own energy, separate from the beast's, was now much larger than before. If he concentrated he could control it to some degree, moving it around through bizarre channels in his body, but he didn't know what it was or what he was doing. He continued to manipulate it regardless, trying to piece together its purpose, but still hasn't discovered it yet. Looking around, Naruto found that the room he was in, a rather large nursery with other cribs and infants, was currently missing any caretaker, with the other children currently asleep or content on their own. He used this opportunity to sit his small and still pudgy body up. He stood on wobbly legs and, using the sides of the crib as support, practiced walking around the edge of the crib. Using his haki, he made sure to watch anyone approaching the room. He had been practicing for a few minutes, when he suddenly felt two large auras in the other room approaching the nursery. As quickly as he was able, he laid down and stared at the ceiling, making small movements and sounds to give the impression that he was just a normal 6-month-old baby. The door opened a moment later and the two powerful auras walked into the room. With his ears now in much better condition, he was able to make out what they were saying. "Which one is he?" A voice, deep and slightly rough, asked its counterpart. "He's just over there, in the corner of the room." Another voice, this one sounding older and belonging to what would seem to be a rather heavy smoker. The two strangers walked to the right side of his crib, looking over him, allowing Daffy to see who was interrupting his training session. The man on the right had bright white hair, it was long, tied in a ponytail behind him with two large bangs framing his face. He had a strange headband on with the kanji for oil upon. His face looked somewhat young with but a small wart on his nose, but his white hair made it hard to discern his age. The other was considerably shorter than the white-haired man, and older as well, with gaunt skin and liver spots dotting his face. He was wearing white robes and strange diamond-shaped hat. The two looked down upon him until one finally spoke up. "So Jiraiya, care to explain why it took you 6 months to respond to my summons?" The older one spoke. His face seemingly calm, but clearly, he was irritated. The taller man, Jiraiya, hesitated for a moment, his face set in stone, then he responded. "When I got news that Minato and Kushina were dead, I immediately set my spy network to ensure that no news was spread about their child." The old man's face flashed a hint of irritation before calming, then speaking again. "And it took you 6 months to accomplish this? Without any contact with your home that had just lost their 4th Hokage?" At the mention of this 4th Hokage, Jiraiya visibly flinched. He was silent for a moment, his eyes taking on a hint of sadness. His reply was quiet, with a tone of defeat, "Yeah." The two stood there for a moment, silent, continuing to look down on Naruto as he continued his charade. The old man let out a small sigh. "Very well, what are you going to do now then? The boy has no other family and you are his godfather, Jiraiya." The white-haired man took in a large breath of air, held it for a moment and then released a large sigh. "Well, I can't imagine myself taking him in, I'm just not father material honestly, even if it's just as a godfather," he said, an arm reaching behind him to scratch the nape of his neck. "Honestly, he'd probably have a better childhood here, in the Leaf Village." The older man glanced at Jiraiya, who did not meet his gaze. "You're sure about this then? If he finds this out he may not forgive you." Jiraiya continued to look down, not even truly looking at Naruto anymore. "Yeah, I'm sure." Jiraiya's voice was quiet and the older man closed his eyes for a moment. "Very well," he said, opening his eyes to look at Naruto, "he'll be raised through the Leaf's orphanage services then. I'll look after him as best I can, Jiraiya, but I am Hokage again, and I am not as young as I once was." Jiraiya quickly responded, "I understand Sarutobi-sensei," almost interrupting the older man. The two stood there a little more before Jiraiya vanished in a small puff of smoke. Sarutobi sighed, he could at least leave the building normally, he grumbled, taking one last look at Naruto before walking out of the room, gently closing the door behind him. Daffy, sensing that the old man was gone with his haki, stopped his small charade and thought about the conversation he had witnessed. "So, it would seem one of my parents, Minato and Kushina, was rather important, this 4th Hokage. I know where I am now too, the Leaf Village, quite a strange name." Daffy continued to parse through the conversation. "I have one more family member as well, a godfather, Jiraiya." Daffy mouthed the name of the godfather that abandoned him, then said the name aloud. With that name firmly in his mind, Daffy stood back up and continued his training, with a smile that did not belong on a child's face. 2 years. Naruto Uzumaki, or rather Don Quixote Doflamingo, was finally 2 years old. Last year, he was finally moved out of the nursery and was given his own room to sleep in. It was rather small, more like a closet than anything else, but unlike everyone else in the orphanage he did not have to share the room, giving him the privacy needed to continue his training. He also was finally able to go outside as well, to the small playground just outside the orphanage and see just what kind of village he lived in. When Jiraiya had called his new home the Leaf Village, he was expecting just that, a village. Instead, he was greeted by a large city, with oddly shaped buildings and various pipes and wires traveling across them. This village was unlike any other he had ever seen, which was saying something. He also took notice to the large mountain with 4 large stone faces engraved onto them, overlooking the village. He recognized the Hokage, Sarutobi, from his encounter with him, meaning the last face on the right must be the 4th Hokage, his father Minato. An important man indeed, to have something like that dedicated to you. Daffy had also made an effort to try and socialize with the other children. Needless to say, that ended in disaster. For one thing, their vocabulary was extremely limited compared to his own, making conversation utterly meaningless. Their games were far too simple and trivial for him to take part in. Also, he got the feeling that the other children didn't like him much. He didn't know why though. He made sure to have his best smile on his face as much as he could, almost always. Oh well, it didn't really matter. These children were just orphans after all, no one important. There was no need to start building any relationships with the rabble after all. He had his eyes on much bigger prizes. This village was ruled by those with the title of Hokage. The current Hokage, who he learned was named Hiruzen Sarutobi, would visit the orphanage now and again. Though he made it seem he was just visiting the unfortunate children without parents, Daffy knew that he was really checking up on him. Sarutobi would also come to deliver a sales pitch about being ninja, this village's military force, of which the strongest was elected as Hokage. He explained to the orphanage that children can go and attend an academy where they would learn how to become the heroes that protected their home, ninja. It did not take Daffy long to decide that the Ninja Academy would be his first stepping stone in his new life, telling the Hokage to sign him up. But there was something else that was bothering him as well. Small things about his new home that had puzzled and slightly worried him. For one, he had heard no mention of either the world government or the Marines in the past 2 years. The naming conventions here were also different. The style of names were different than what he was used to, usually more complex than simply Trebol or Baby 5. Everyone here also would introduce their given names first and surnames last if they had one, the opposite of what he was used to. He had no way to confirm it, but he didn't think he was in Kansas anymore. Regardless, Naruto Uzumaki continued his life in the orphanage, a grin on his face and a diamond-shaped hat in mind. Aneko Hamadate did not like Naruto Uzumaki. She had run this orphanage for almost 20 years now and, while there was the occasional bad apple, never in her life would she say that she did not like any one of the children living in her orphanage. Naruto Uzumaki changed that. She knew that young Naruto was the Jinchuriki of the nine-tailed fox. That was really an open secret at this point, but that wasn't why she did not like him. No, there was something else, something off about the child. When he had first arrived at the orphanage, she was wary of him, knowing his status as the fox's container. She did her job, took care of him, and that was it, end of story. After a while, she began to notice strange things about him. His eyes seemingly holding an awareness that didn't belong in such a young child. Some days, she could have sworn that she had seen the young boy in his crib, practicing to walk a couple months ahead of others his age, but lay right back down as soon as she had walked in. That wasn't what had disturbed her the most though. When he was young, the boy would almost never cry. It was only when he needed to be changed or feed, never anything else. Eventually, even that stopped altogether. When the boy would fall and scrap his knee, or when the older kids would try and pick on and bully him, never would he cry. No, instead there was just a smile, a grin if you could even call it that. It looked normal to most, yes, but after seeing that smile every day for over a year, Aneko knew better. There was something wrong with that smile, with that boy. The other children knew it as well. They would hardly ever interact with him anymore, and when they did it would not go well. That boy would simply smile at them, brushing them off and almost ignoring them completely, as if he were looking down on them. It wasn't just his social skills that were off either. The boy moved with grace, an elegance and control that a 5-year-old should not possess. He walked with confidence wherever he went, with that damned smile never going away. He was stronger than others around him as well. She had seen him beat children that were almost twice his age and had training in the ninja academy, though he never instigated the fights. Yes, Aneko Hamadate truly did not like Naruto Uzumaki. He had shown an interest in becoming a ninja as well, a terrifying thought. And with that thought in mind, she signed the letter she had written to the Hokage, his official guardian, calling for his immediate removal from the premises. Normally, she would feel bad for sending a child out all alone into the world. But Naruto Uzumaki was not a child, this she was certain of. Hiruzen Sarutobi was not having a good day. It, like almost every other, was filled with monotonous paperwork and political strife that he was well and truly sick of at this point. He remembered a time when he enjoyed these things, but now he was missing the retirement that Minato was so kind to bring him. He grabbed the next obstacle in his path to the day's end, what looked to be a letter addressed to him, and filled his pipe with another round of tobacco. He read the letter as he did so, stopped for a moment to put his pipe down and reread the letter, hoping that he had misread it. After, he sighed and, with weary hands, set the letter down and picked up his pipe. He sat there for a few minutes, enjoying the downtime that he honestly felt he deserved. When his pipe ran dry, he quickly scribbled a reply to the letter he had received, signed it and signaled for one of his Anbu. Yes, Lord Hokage? A tiger-masked Anbu had appeared kneeling in front of his desk. Hiruzen handed the folded-up letter to the agent. Take this letter to Akeno Hamadate at the Southern Orphanage, he ordered, his voice firm and calm to hide the frustration he was currently feeling. Without another word, the Anbu agent disappeared to fulfill his orders. Hiruzen got up from his chair, stretching his back that sore from constantly sitting down for the past few hours. As sad as it was, Hiruzen had anticipated this happening and had already rented an apartment in advance in case this situation ever occurred. He walked out of the room, entering the hallway and greeting his secretary. I'm going out for the rest of the day. Push any appointments I have to tomorrow. Not stopping to hear her answer, the Hokage continued to walk out the tower and made his way to Naruto's soon-to-be former home. His pace was slow as he greeted the various villagers around him. He was not looking forward to this. While he enjoyed visiting and speaking with Naruto, telling him that he was going to be living alone from now on was not something he was eager to do. The villagers were quite wary, afraid even, of the young boy. That fear spread to their children as well, ostracizing Naruto and making it very difficult for him to make any friends. He knew this, it was something he was keenly aware of. His decision to reveal Naruto's status as the nine-tailed fox's Jinchuriki was a hard one. There were many ninja that night, watching the ceiling happen. Who knew what kind of rumors would be spread if left alone? To mitigate this, he had decided to reveal Naruto's status, making it clear that he was just a normal child and that he was a hero. That decision clearly went well. Still, Naruto himself did not seem to be bothered by this if he was aware of it, which he undoubtedly was. He was a smart kid, advancing well beyond his peers in pretty much all things. When the two of them would get a chance to speak, he didn't feel like he was talking to a child. Honestly, Naruto reminded him of Itachi, with eyes too old for such a young soul. Like Itachi, Naruto was talented as well. Hiruzen had already suspected that the boy was a censor, never being surprised when the Hokage would drop by, almost knowing that he was on his way. His physical abilities were quite impressive as well if Aneko's letter is to be believed. Defeating multiple academy students that were almost twice his age with no formal training was quite a feat. Hiruzen continued his steady pace toward the orphanage. No doubt by now Tiger would have delivered the letter and Naruto would be almost done packing his things, what little he had anyways. Hiruzen's thoughts eventually strayed to his now wayward student, Jiraiya. All those years ago, when he had come with him to visit Naruto, Jiraiya had disappointed him. Was that unfair? Perhaps, he knew that Jiraiya was in a lot of pain after Minato's death. He had spent most of life searching for his child of prophecy, and finally he had thought he had found him in Minato. Minato and Kushina treated him like family, something Jiraiya never had. And in the end, he lost everything in a single night. Naruto was a reminder of that pain, of everything he lost. Yet Hiruzen couldn't help but see it as a Jiraiya running from his responsibilities. The two still kept in touch via letters, though only for official leave business. Still, Hiruzen would mention the boy in his letters, encrypted of course, and mention his hardships and struggles, hoping to convince him to change his mind and return. He never even bothered to acknowledge them. Yes, in Hiruzen's eyes, Jiraiya was just running from his responsibilities. Finally, Hiruzen had reached the orphanage and approached the front. Already, he could hear the sounds of children playing and laughter. He waited for a couple moments until the door finally opened, Akeno there to greet him. A short, brown-haired and rather heavy-set woman, but one that he had known to be a mother hen through and through. This thought only made him more disappointed in her, an emotion he was beginning to be feeling far too often. Hello Lord Hokage, her voice trembling slightly. There was a small look of shame in her eyes that could barely stand to meet his own. What stood out most though was the look of determination in the rest of her features. He didn't have to do this. As Hokage, he could force her to continue keeping Naruto in her care, but that look meant that she was adamant about getting him out of here. If Naruto did stay, his life would only go downhill from here as the caretakers began to neglect him more and more till he was already independent. It was best to get it over with now instead. Take me to him, his replied with his voice demanding and possessing an air of authority. Akeno startled slightly, wide-eyed, and nodded, turning around to guide him to Naruto's room. The two went through the building, with Hiruzen smiling at all the children running up to greet him. Soon, they made it Naruto's room, and not even bothering to knock, Akeno opened his door and walked in. "Hey old man, what took ya so long huh?" rung out a young voice, full of amusement and mischief. Looking inside, Hiruzen spotted young Naruto. He was leaning up against the far wall, his arms crossed and a small backpack sat down in front of him. The short blonde-haired boy was wearing his ever-famous grin, a bright pink shirt on with equally bright white shorts and black shoes. He had on a pair of oddly shaped sunglasses, with a silver frame and red lenses. Naruto had asked for them during last year's Rinne festival that they spent together and wore them every day. In fact, Hiruzen couldn't remember seeing him without them on since then. Yes, without a doubt, Naruto had quite the flair for the dramatic. It didn't bother Hiruzen though, he had seen stranger things and stranger people. Hiruzen smiled lightly, then chuckled a bit. "Well, when you get as old as me it takes a bit longer to get around," he said, humoring the boy. "Heh, sure old man. Whatever you say," Naruto replied, seemingly laughing at some inside joke. Naruto pushed off the wall, kicking his backpack up and looping one of the straps around his shoulder in one smooth motion. "Now come on old man, let's go see this new place ya got for little ol' me," he said, walking past him and Akeno and toward the front door. Yeah, quite the flair for the dramatic indeed. The Hokage followed him to the front door, amused by Naruto's antics. "Now Naruto, shouldn't I be leading the way? After all, I doubt you'll know where to go after we walk out that door." Naruto, finally at the front door, opened it and bowed dramatically, gesturing for Hiruzen to step out. "Of course Lord Hokage, I was getting the door for you. One should be respectful to their elders." Heh. Naruto, with that grin still plastered on his face, laughing at the barb about his age. The two walked out of the orphanage, now side by side. They began to walk closer to Naruto's new apartment. It was located closer to the Hokage monument and thus the academy as well, which Hiruzen signed Naruto up to begin attending next year. As they walked through the village, the various villagers would often stop to look at the two, and nod in greeting like they did when he was alone. They would often move to the other side of the street to avoid being close to them. Seeing this, Hiruzen looked down at Naruto. Naruto seemed to be ignoring this, grinning like always and his eyes hidden behind his stylish sunglasses. Hiruzen sighed a little, looking at him. Naruto had a bad habit of walking a little strangely. His hands would be in his pockets and his legs would move at an almost exaggerated pace, lifting up far too high when he walked. But he was mostly concerned about the way Naruto would hunch his head, as if he were too tall and trying to duck under something. They passed by and stopped by a few places, getting Naruto food, clothes and various supplies like utensils and dish soap. The apartment was already fully furnished and Hiruzen would leave further decoration up to Naruto. Continuing away from the market, Naruto stops and turns, standing still for a moment. "Hey old man, what's the building for?" The child looked up at Hiruzen pointing at a building to their left. Hiruzen looked over at the building Naruto had pointed out. It was a fairly large building, 2 stories and with a red shingles making up the roof. The beige walls showed obvious signs of wear, spider web cracks running all along them. He knew this building quite well, watched both its construction and the need for its use. Built during and after the First Great Shinobi War, it housed all of the war orphans that the war had brought and has done so for the second and third as well. It was a building that symbolized the pain and hardship that the Leaf had gone through, and a prison for the children whose parents were sacrificed in her name. Hiruzen looked down at the boy. Naruto looking towards the building, his usual smile missing from his face. That's the first orphanage that was built in the Hidden Leaf Village. Why is there something the matter? He asked, curious. The boy stares at the building for a moment longer, eventually looking away and continuing. Nothing, let's keep going, as he called back to him. They continue towards where Naruto will be staying. They finally walk up to a beige building with maroon-colored shingles. Standing about 4 stories tall, it was a plain apartment building. As they proceed to follow up the stairs to the top floor and stop at the third door on their right, at room 4C. This will be the building you will be staying at. Opening the door, he revealed a single, small, plain room with dim green-colored walls and a wooden floor. In it was a bed with a small nightstand and alarm clock, a small desk and chair with a small radio on it and a single dresser. And this will be your new room. Naruto, after adopting his smile again on their way to the apartment complex, entered his new room, looking around. The two walked through a small doorway leading to the kitchen, where a small refrigerator, stove top and a small table with 4 chairs served as Naruto's new dining room. There was another door in the kitchen leading to the bathroom. Hiruzen put the bags of groceries on the dining table. So, what do you think, Naruto? Hiruzen asked, eager and slightly nervous to hear the boy's response. Naruto looked around the apartment for a moment, his smile dropping for a moment. Then his smile returned and he looked up at the old man. It looks like shit, old man. Ha ha ha, Naruto said, laughing. Rather disappointed but not very surprised. The third Hokage sighed. Language, Naruto. Hiruzen reprimanded him, handed him a spare key and then continued. I'm afraid you'll have to live with it for now, at least until you become a powerful shinobi and earn some more money. Speaking of, the Hokage reached into his robes and pulled out a small bundle of money, handing it to Naruto. As of this moment you'll be receiving a fixed income every 30 days from the Hidden Leaf in order to help take care of yourself. This is all you'll be getting, so be sure to spend it wisely. The Hokage moved out of the kitchen and into the main room, with Naruto following him. Also, I have enrolled you into the Ninja Academy for next year. As long as you'll be attending, you won't have to worry about paying any rent or utility bills. Naruto flung his backpack off his shoulder and onto the bed, his grin widening as he flipped through the bills that Hiruzen just handed him. After flipping through the last bill, Naruto spoke up. Anything else I need to know, eh? Naruto asked, still gleefully looking at the money in his hands. Hiruzen shook his head at the young boy's greed, and replied, no, that's everything for now. I'll be visiting in a few days to check up on you, and if you need anything I'm usually at the Hokage Tower. Hiruzen opened the door, ready to head home and relax for the rest of the day. Yeah, see y'all later, old man. Naruto waved him off and closed the door behind him. With that, Hiruzen made his way home, this time traveling by the rooftops. There are many thoughts about Naruto on his way home. What Naruto was thinking and what his future was. As much as Hiruzen hated it, there were many things that rested on the boy's shoulders, too many. He would do all he could to make sure Naruto went down the right path. Hopefully he wouldn't be the only one for much longer. Daffy closed the door behind the old man, the smile on face dropping for a moment. Ever since they passed that building, the other orphanage, what his Haki had sensed had been bothering him, distracting him. Looking out the window in his new apartment, the sun was beginning to set. He would investigate it tomorrow. For now he would settle into his new home. He put the things that the third had bought him away into its new designated areas, made some dinner for himself and, after he was done eating, laid in bed. He lay there for a while, trying to sleep, but the orphanage situation still bugged him. It took a while, but eventually sleep took him. Daffy woke again at the crack of dawn, like always. He got out of his new bed and decided to enjoy his new freedoms. He used his own shower and bathroom, no longer having to share it with various other orphans. He cooked his own breakfast, something he was slightly out of practice of but was more than capable of. Changing clothes, Daffy grabbed something, a gift, out of his backpack and exited his new apartment, locking the door behind him with an objective in mind. Slowly, Daffy made his way over to the orphanage that he and the old man had passed yesterday. It took quite a bit, as Daffy had a bit of trouble remembering exactly where it was, but he found it again eventually. It was just before noon now, and just like at previous home, there was various children playing at a nearby playground. It was like clockwork, as soon as he was in range that Aura was back, calling out to him through his hockey. Daffy with his signature smile walked onto the playground and spotted two benches sitting back to back in the middle of the park. He walked toward it, slowly, tracking that Aura through his hockey, and sat down on one of the benches. Then he waited, his eyes staring straight ahead of him and his smile dropping. There, a boy was a few meters ahead of him. He was quite odd-looking, a bowl-shaped haircut, thick eyebrows and large, round eyes with rather prominent eyelashes. A small frown adorned the boy's stone-set face, a perfect example of seriousness. The boy walked forward at a steady pace, his hands neatly folded behind him. He continued to approach him, eventually reaching the bench Daffy sat at. Rather than sit next to him, the mysterious boy circled around, sitting at the bench just behind him. The two sat there a moment, back to back, the sound of the other children playing around them. Daffy reached into his pocket and pulled out the gift, a pair of sunglasses. Taking them, he reached over his shoulder, offering it to the other boy, who smoothly reciprocated the action, taking them from him. Daffy could hear the boy unfold them and place them on his face. They sat there for a moment, until finally, the other boy greeted an old friend. The two sat there, at Daffy's dining room table, somewhat awkwardly, both of them eating the lunch, some sandwiches, Daffy had made a few minutes ago. Not really sure what to say to each other, they ate in silence for a few minutes until one of them finally broke the silence. "So, I see you brought back the bowl cut," Daffy said, his usual smile slightly twitching, desperately trying to think of something to converse about. Virgo was not helping in the slightest, just sitting there stoically with a slice of ham stuck to the side of his face. Virgo sat there for a moment, chewing his food, then swallowed. Yes, it seemed appropriate. He returned to his meal. The awkwardness came back. Daffy sat there for a moment, slightly stunned and at a loss for words. "Hey, yeah," Daffy somewhat replied. He then pointed to the side of his face. By the way, you got something." "Daffy," Virgo interrupted. Daffy's smile fell from his face. This wasn't good. Virgo never interrupted him. In all the years the two had known each other, the two always respected each other. No, Daffy knew. Virgo was livid. "What happened?" Virgo continued, looking directly at him now, that stern expression on his face. Daffy paused for a moment. He knew what he was asking. Virgo was well aware by now how he himself arrived in this strange new place, and now they were both here. Daffy's smile returned as he looked up at the blank ceiling of his apartment. Then, suddenly, he began to laugh. He laughed and laughed, not able to contain himself, and Virgo watched all the while, his expression never changing. His laughter stopped as quickly as it came, his smile turning into a frown. He sat there, still looking at the ceiling. "I lost." The two sat there, Virgo watching, and Daffy waiting for his response. He didn't have to wait long. "I see," Virgo replied, his voice calm. Virgo scooted back in his chair and stood up, walking toward the exit. Daffy looked down watching him leave, slightly confused. Then Virgo looked behind him, grabbing the slice of ham that was stuck to his face. "Follow me," he said, popping the leftover ham into his mouth, and with that the two of them left the apartment. After leaving the apartment, Daffy continued to follow Virgo, a frown replacing his usual smile as he contemplated what was going through Virgo's mind. They walked for quite a while, almost an hour if he had to guess, reaching what looked to be a forested area in the village. "This is one of the training grounds located inside of the village," Virgo said as they walked through the forest. "It's used by various ninja, this village's military force, as a location to spar and practice dangerous techniques." Doflamingo was silent for a moment as they reached a clearing in the forest. Walking toward the center of the clearing, he replied, "I see, and what are we going to be doing here then?" The two walked toward the center of the field, Virgo still not answering his question. When they finally reached it, Virgo stopped, with Daffy forced to stare at the young boy's back. He asked. Virgo turned around, looking back at Daffy, his hands still neatly folded behind his back. "We are not going to be doing anything. You, however," he said, as his hands slowly emerged from behind his back. are going to try and survive. With that said, Virgo's form rushed toward him, his hands curled into fists. Daffy, surprised and taken aback from the unexpected attack, quickly tried to call on his haki and lashed out with a mid-high kick at Virgo's midsection. As soon as he delivered it, he realized his mistake. His legs, now much shorter than his older bodies, never reached him as he sent the kick far too early. Virgo advanced closer to him, ignoring the wayward kick, and threw a right punch straight at his chest. Daffy's haki failed him, too startled by the situation of his longest friend suddenly attacking him and his attack failing. He brought his arms up in an attempt to block the attack, another mistake. One does not simply block an attack from Virgo. Just before Virgo's fist made contact with his arms, it took in a black metallic sheen, and crashed into Daffy's defense. Armament Hawk, he didn't even have the chance to finish the thought, as his defense was torn apart by the enhanced attack. His body was launched from his now previous position, not stopping until he had finally crashed into one of the trees in the forest behind him. He could feel the bark of the tree crack and splinter as he collided with it. His new body screamed as it felt the greatest amount of pain it had ever known. Falling to the ground, Daffy lay there for a moment, gasping for breath and looking up at Virgo. Virgo stood there, his stern expression giving way to show grief and pain. His hands were folded behind his back now, but Daffy could tell they were shaking. "Daffy," Virgo said, his voice trembling, something that Daffy thought he would never hear. "For over 30 years, you were my king. Over 30 years ago I dedicated myself to serving you, protecting you, my only friend. All of us did." He stopped for a moment, looking down at him, then continued. "But now, we know that isn't enough. You must become more than a king. You must become a warrior, a leader, someone who does more than rule his people, or else we will meet the same fate. I won't allow that. I will not let you lose again," Virgo said, raising his voice, almost screaming near the end, again, something Daffy thought he would never hear from him. "Now, stand up." Resolving himself, Daffy stood up. The sun was setting by the time they were done, and the two boys began their long trek home for a much-needed rest. Daffy, his smile now back on his face, had his arm wrapped around Virgo's shoulder, who was helping him walk back home. He was an utter mess. Virgo, even in a much younger body, hadn't lost his touch. He beat him into the ground over and over again, but Daffy, knowing why he was doing it, didn't really mind. Until the fourth beating anyway. Virgo had just a few scuffs and scrapes on him comparatively. Having a body a year older than his own gave a distinct advantage. That's what he tried to convince himself of at least. Overall, Daffy was rather happy to have his friend back, and the two limped their way back to the apartment complex. After a little more than an hour and the sun beginning to disappear over the horizon, they finally made it to his front door. Stumbling into the apartment, Daffy threw himself onto the bed and relaxed. Resting for a moment, he sat up and looked at Virgo, who was opening the door again, preparing to leave. Hey, Virgo, where y'all goin'?" Daffy cried out, a bit alarmed that he was leaving so soon. Virgo stopped and turned toward him. "I have to return to the orphanage. It is almost past curfew and it would not do for me to suddenly go missing. My new name is Lee, by the way." Daffy rubbed the back of his neck, frustrated. "Yeah, you're probably right. Next time I see him I'm gonna ask the old man to get you a place here too." Virgo paused for a moment in confusion. "Old man?" he asked. Daffy grinned in amusement, sitting up further on the bed. "So, get this. Apparently this boy," he said, pointing at himself, "Naruto Uzumaki, is related to some pretty important people. That includes the old man, the third Hokage. He's been watching over me for quite a while and he has a hard time saying no to the poor orphaned boy of the late fourth Hokage." "Heh," Daffy said, laughing at the end of his explanation. Virgo was silent as he took in Daffy's words, then he nodded. "Very well, I will return tomorrow and we will resume our training. Inform me if there are any updates in living arrangements." With that said, Virgo stepped out of the apartment, closing the door behind him. Daffy laid back onto the bed, his smile fading as he started to once again feel the bruises and soreness in his muscles. He kept replaying the events of the day in his mind, convincing himself that it wasn't all a dream. After a few minutes he made and ate dinner and laid back down for some much-needed rest. The third Hokage was having a pretty good day. It was well past midday, and after having his half-day off when he took Naruto to his new home last week, he felt refreshed, and was able to catch up on his paperwork. Smoking his pipe while enjoying being able to actually see the surface of his desk, he decided that he was going to go visit Naruto today. Standing up and stretching his aching back, he decided to be rather adventurous today, exiting out the nearby window like so many of his other ninja decided to do far too often. He chuckled to himself as he sensed his Anbu scramble to catch up to him, not expecting his dramatic exit. He jumped from rooftop to rooftop, the wind rushing past his face, reminding him of his younger days. On the way there, he thought about Naruto and the plans he had for the boy. He was already planning to grab Kakashi from Anbu soon, preparing him to eventually lead Naruto's team and become his teacher. He thought about letting Naruto graduate early. He knew Naruto could pull it off if he wanted to, but he decided against it. He saw what was becoming of Itachi, the latest young prodigy, and he refused to let the same happen to Naruto. He already had enough on his shoulders, even if he didn't know it yet. As he continued to make his way over to Naruto, he looked over the village. The villagers on the streets, smiles on their faces, and some children playing ninja down the street. Seeing it made him happy, but a little sad as well, knowing that no one saw this as he did. That this was only still possible thanks to Naruto. That thought made him think of Minato, and the night of the Nine Tails attack. That night filled him with regret. He was known as the Professor, the master of 1,000 techniques, and yet he didn't know the one technique that would have saved Naruto's family, and the village's fourth Hokage. He knew it now, of course. Knowing that if the nine-tailed fox was ever released, the Reaper Death Seal was likely their only hope, and he made sure to memorize every aspect of Minato's notes about the now legendary technique. Putting those thoughts aside, he finally made it to Naruto's front door. Taking out his spare key, he unlocked the door and walked in, knocking at the same time. "Naruto, are you Hiruzen stopped talking. When he walked inside, he saw a peculiar sight. Naruto was home, yes, with his signature smile and bright clothes, but there was another boy with him. He had a bowl-cut hairstyle and, like Naruto, had a pair of sunglasses on. His were silver with black frames, unlike Naruto's silver and red. He recognized them as another pair that Naruto had owned. He must have given them to the boy. He wore a plain green t-shirt and blue pants with black dress shoes, with a rather calm, almost stern expression on his face. The two of them seemed to be exercising or playing some kind of game. Both of them doing a one-armed handstand, trying to see who would fall over first. Hello Naruto, who's your friend and what are you doing?" Hiruzen asked, a little confused but eager to meet his new friend. Naruto's smile widened and he sprung off the ground, flipping backward and landing in a crouch with his arms spread out, making a small pose. A second later, the boy stood up, chuckling slightly. "Heh, we got tired of waiting for ya, so we decided to play a game, see who could stand on one arm the longest." Hiruzen smiled, thinking, so he really is a sensory type, and a gifted one as well. Being able to sense me for that long at the speed I was going means he could tell where I was from pretty far away. Impressive. And your friend? Hiruzen asked, curious to see what kind of person would make friends with a boy like Naruto. The other boy smoothly rolled to his feet, folding his hands behind his back. Walking up to the Hokage, he formally bowed at the waist. "Greetings, Lord Hokage. My name is Rock Lee. Thank you for all of your help," the now named Rock Lee said, confusing Hiruzen. Thank you for what?" the third asked, a pit forming in his stomach. This was, apparently, Naruto's cue as right after he spoke, Naruto made to answer his question. "Oh yeah, I forgot to mention. I'm adopting this kid, old man, so I'm gonna need ya to do the paperwork and get me some more money." Heh. Yes, the third Hokage was having a pretty good day. He really hoped he could retire soon. He was too old for this shit. Sasuke Uchiha was a very proud boy. He was proud of his family, proud of his brother, and proud to say that he was the strongest there was in his generation. These 3 points remained true throughout his childhood, all until he entered the academy, that is. He remembered the time he first saw him, the brightly colored boy with a grin too wide, too persistent to be natural. Other than that, Sasuke never thought much of the boy, thinking he was just some weirdo. But that changed quickly. On the last day of the first week of school, the instructors held a small sparring tournament for all the new students. A way to test how far along all the children were and what they would need to learn the most in their first year at the academy. Needless to say, Sasuke was confident. He was an Uchiha, a member of an elite clan, and had trained hard to gain the skill he had today. He had sparred with older students in the academy already, fellow Uchiha, so he knew he was skilled. Being the only one in his class only further increased his confidence. He watched the other students spar, waiting eagerly for his turn, his chance to represent his clan and show the others just what Sasuke Uchiha was capable of. Finally, it took a while, but the instructor, Iruka-sensei, called his name. With the female portion of the class cheering and chanting his name, he strutted up to the ring, waiting for his opponent to be called. Naruto Uzumaki. With his opponent's name announced, he looked out toward the group of students, waiting for the poor soul to step up. The way he walked was wrong. Everything about him was just wrong. His legs, rising too high, exaggerating his every step. The way he kept his hands in his pockets, as if they were something that he didn't want to waste on something so insignificant. He was hunched over, as if he were looking down on him despite them being the same height. And that grin, it told him everything his eyes should have held but couldn't be seen behind those glasses. There was hate in that smile of his. Sasuke shook those thoughts from his head though. He had a fight to win. He had a father to make proud. Naruto finally reached the ring and stood a foot across from him. The two made the seal of confrontation at Iruka's request, something they had learned yesterday in class, and at his mark, the spar began. The two stood there for a moment, waiting for the other to make the first move. Getting tired of waiting though, Sasuke started the engagement. Jumping slightly into the air, he performed a picture-perfect whirlwind kick aimed at Naruto's head. Naruto ducked at the knees, his hands still in his pockets and that grin never leaving his face as Sasuke's leg passed right over him. Growling slightly, Sasuke completed his mid-air turn and, still suspended in the air, aimed a drop kick onto Naruto's crouching form, a variation of the leaf whirlwind he was taught by his family. His leg rocketed down toward Naruto, intent on slamming into the back of his head when, suddenly, just before impact, Naruto disappeared. His attack missing, Sasuke landed on the ground confused on what had happened. Ha ha ha. He didn't just hear it, he felt it. The laugh from behind sending chills down his spine, causing dread to form in his stomach. He quickly turned around, raising his arms to block any sudden attacks, but there were none. He just stood there, his hands still in his pockets, that damn grin still on his face. Sasuke's heart was racing, his breathing speeding up until he was almost panting. That smile, that damn smile. Was he mocking him? These thoughts took over his mind, clearing away the dread and nervousness that filled him before. Instead, he saw red. He charged at the boy, intent on ending this clown that dared to make a fool of Sasuke Uchiha. Sasuke didn't even see it coming. A strong force impacting into his chin, launching him back and forcing him to stare at the light blue sky. He landed on his back, dazed. Arching his head, he looked at his opponent, desperately trying to piece together whatever the hell just happened to him. It didn't take long. He was still standing there, with just one difference. One of his legs still extended in a full front kick at chin level. A kick, he thought. I was beaten. By a single kick? By then, Iruka had already announced Naruto as the winner, who lowered his leg and walked back to stand with the other students. Sasuke got up, shaking the dizziness from his head, brushed himself off and did the same. Iruka asked if he was all right, but he ignored him. No one was cheering anymore, no one was chanting his name. The spars continued, but Sasuke wasn't watching anymore. All he could see was that damn grin. Fujimaru Terada had been an academy teacher for almost 40 years. Yet never had he seen a student quite like Rock Lee. The boy was like a machine, he learned and adapted quickly, never being surprised or fazed by anything, even when Fujimaru made an honest effort to do just that, and he always had a stern expression on his face. Honestly, if he had never seen the boy eat and drink, he wouldn't believe he was human. Speaking of, the boy was an absolute slob, always coming into class with the remains of his breakfast or lunch all over his face. He didn't know how he never noticed either. It wasn't like it was just a couple crumbs or anything. At one point there was half a hamburger just kinda glued to his face, waiting for someone to point it out to the oblivious boy. He remembered watching one day just to figure out if he was doing it on purpose. He promised never to do that again. A slice of salami in a sandwich he was eating just sort of slipped out of his sandwich and floated onto the side of his face, with Lee never even noticing. He vowed to never figure out that mystery. That made the boy weird and eccentric, yes, but that wasn't why Fujimaru thought Lee was quite special. No, the reason he was so unique in his eyes was because the boy was a monster. Fujimaru was quite fond of using spars in order to drill his lessons into his young pupils' impressionable minds. That was what made Lee stand out so much. The boy could fight. He was fast and efficient, easily able to predict his opponent's moves and react to them in just the right way. He was tough, remarkably so. Fujimaru once asked Lee to help him demonstrate a judo throw. With the boy's skill, he thought Lee would be able to land on his feet and recover from the throw. But when Fujimaru grabbed the boy's arm and threw him over his shoulder and toward the ground, he did nothing of the sort. Lee smashed into the ground, taking the full brunt of the attack. Worried for his student, and also his job, Fujimaru quickly knelt next to him, trying to assess the damage. Lee's face was as stern as ever, and without a moment's hesitation, stood up and dusted himself off. Folding his hands behind his back, he joined the other students, leaving an imprint of his body in the ground. These things made Rock Lee a talented young ninja, yes, but what made him a monster was his brutality. The boy was cruel, he could see that. In his spars he went out of his way to deal the most damage possible to his opponents, and often toyed with them, dragging out the bouts for as long as he could when he could easily end it. What was worse was the way he accomplished this, as if he had done it before, as if he had experience. Now, when he thought of Rock Lee, he didn't think of a young talented academy student aspiring to be the very best he could. No, now he thought of a ruthless machine that wouldn't hesitate to put his enemies 6 feet in the ground. So, why didn't Fujimaru report this to the Hokage? Because, when he thought back to the wars he fought and the friends he lost, he couldn't help but think that he could have used a man like Rock Lee at his side. Writing 100% on the piece of paper, Fujimaru put the paper into the stack on his left, and began grading the next test. Kakashi Hitaki was rather antsy today, something he was not used to feeling. Most of the time he was lazing about, relaxed and reading his book. When he wasn't, he was focused and determined, ready to complete his mission and protect his comrades. Antsy was not something he was used to feeling, but when the third Hokage asked to meet with him in his regular guise rather than his Anbu uniform, the Anbu captain couldn't help but become restless. Traveling over the rooftops of the Leaf Village, he quickly arrived at the window in the Hokage's office and let himself in. "You wanted to see me, Lord Hokage," he drawled out, standing in front of his desk and an orange book in his face, sounding completely disinterested. The Hokage looked up from the document he was examining, looking annoyed with him. "Yes, in fact, I wanted to speak with you about 3 hours ago." Giving the god of shinobi his traditional eye smile, he stayed silent waiting for the Hokage to speak. The aging god took a drag of his pipe before speaking up. "I'm pulling you out of the Anbu." "Why?" Kakashi immediately interjected, curious as to the Hokage's reasoning. They both knew he was one of the strongest shinobi in the Anbu Black Ops at the moment. His departure would mean a drop in mission success rate and, more importantly in Kakashi's eyes, a rise in friendly casualties. The Hokage stood up from his chair, turning around to look out the window and look upon his village. "Naruto is 9 years old now," he said, the mentioning of Naruto startling Kakashi for a moment. The Hokage continued a moment later. "He will be graduating in a few years and he will need a Jonin-sensei," said the Hokage, taking a long drag from his pipe. Kakashi hesitated for a moment before speaking up. "Still, I don't see why I have to. You have been a part of the Anbu for many years now, Kakashi. You have been used to working with the best of the best, but if you are to teach a group of genin, you will need to lower your expectations." "Besides," the Hokage said, sighing slightly, "after seeing what had happened to Itachi, I would have released you from the Anbu anyways." The two stood there silently, thinking about the words each had said to the other. "Very well, Lord Hokage," Kakashi spoke first. "Good." The Hokage turned around, reached into his robes and pulled out a small book, tossing it over to him. Kakashi caught the book, opening it up. "What's this?" he asked, flipping through to the marked pages. "The latest graduates," replied the Hokage. "It'll be a while until Naruto graduates." Until that time, you can join the rest of the elite Jonin, and start testing potential genin. Of course, Lord Hokage. Is there anything else? Kakashi asked, desperately hoping the answer was no. No, you're free to go. The Hokage returned to his chair and picked up the previous document. Kakashi leapt through the window, completely eager to read about his potential new students. The conversation brought back bad memories, memories of the child he was hesitant to meet. Naruto. With that thought, Kakashi returned home, steeling himself for the new challenges his shinobi life would bring him. He wasn't worried though, after all, shinobi endure. Shikamaru Nara liked to think of himself as a rather intelligent 9-year-old boy, as much of a drag that intelligence often was. Still, that same intelligence and the perception it offered made him very curious about the boy named Naruto Uzumaki. To be short, Naruto was an enigma. At first, he thought the boy was just another class clown, with his wide grin and strange choice in clothes. It did not take long for Shikamaru to reassess that previous conclusion. The strange boy had shown, through his class ranking, that he was very intelligent, holding the position of top student with almost no competition. He did it almost effortlessly, constantly slacking off and skipping class. Shikamaru found him to be, for lack of better words, somewhat creepy as well. The way he would simply smile at you, his eyes hidden behind those glasses of his. His laugh being a curious thing, as if he were laughing at a joke only he could understand. One day, after school, Shikamaru took it upon himself to challenge the talented boy to a game of shogi at the park, a board game that his father had taught him, a game only his father could beat him at. Naruto agreed and, after explaining the rules to him, the two began. It was the most grating experience Shikamaru ever had. At first, Naruto only looked at the board to make his move, the rest of the time dedicated to directing that sickening grin straight at him. He would chuckle now and then, as Shikamaru would contemplate his next move, further unnerving him, and the two would never speak. About 5 minutes later, well into the game by now, Naruto wouldn't even look at the board anymore, his hands moving almost autonomously to shift the pieces around the board. The pressure at this point was crippling. Shikamaru was being outplayed at every turn, and all the while he refused to look up from the board. He refused to look up at him. It didn't take long after that. Another 5 minutes and he was swiftly defeated, his nerves breaking his concentration. Honestly, he wasn't very confident he could win even if he had held it together. Now, Shikamaru couldn't say he disliked the other boy. No, he had no animosity for Naruto Uzumaki, but he knew someone who did. There was no doubt in Shikamaru's mind that Sasuke Uchiha loathed Naruto Uzumaki. He would see it very often, Sasuke constantly trying to one-up the blonde-haired boy, and every time he would fail. Every interaction between the two would instantly become a competition to Sasuke. Shikamaru knew that. Yet to Naruto it was just a game, with him laughing at Sasuke's attempts. Shikamaru would laugh if it wasn't so sad. He knew their situation, everyone who paid attention did. 1. The orphaned boy who never had any parents yet always had a smile on his face. The other, a boy whose parents were taken from him, by his own brother no less. Shikamaru couldn't help but feel pity for them, ashamed at how happy he was to not know either pain. Shikamaru rose his head from his desk, escaping from his thoughts and looking at Iruka, still drawling on about something or other. He took a look around the room from his seat, the highest seat in the right corner of the room. Sure enough, there they were. Naruto was sitting at the front row, leaning back in his chair with his feet on his desk. He was chewing some gum, blowing rather impressive bubbles until the gum popped, rinse and repeat. A couple rows behind him was Sasuke. His elbows were leaning on the desk in front of him with his hands folded in front of his face. Even from here, he could tell Sasuke was aiming a murderous glare straight at Naruto. He got the feeling Naruto knew it too, and was enjoying every bit of it. Thankfully, the bell began to ring, and the students packed their things and hurried out the door, ignoring Iruka's words to remember to do tonight's homework. Once the majority of the students left the room, Shikamaru followed behind them, heading outside. Seeing the group of students in front of him, he spotted Naruto in the crowd, something that was fairly easy. Naruto broke from the group of students, taking a different path home than the one that Shikamaru usually saw him take. He thought about following him, seeing what he was up to and maybe getting to know him a bit better, but decided against it. It was too much of a drag. After leaving the academy, Doflamingo started to make his way down to the training grounds that he and Virgo began using 4 years ago. He was by himself today, with Virgo deciding to go shopping and grab groceries for the both of them. It had been surprisingly difficult for him to convince the old man to give Virgo a place of his own, especially considering the old man spent most of the time trying to explain that 1. He was too young to adopt a child, and 2. Said child was older than him anyways. He did not respond to, "You worried too much, old man," very well either. Still, 3 hours later, Virgo got his own key to an apartment just across from his own. Yeah, Daffy was a manipulative bastard, alright. Picking up his pace, Daffy took to the rooftops and sped along to the training grounds, making records time. Sitting down in a random area of the forest to avoid any interruptions, Daffy got to work. He had a small list of objectives to accomplish today. He was already capable of using the 3 basic techniques the academy taught. He had something else in mind for today's training session. First, was meeting with the 9-tailed fox. Yes, it did not take him long to figure out that the entity was in fact the 9 tails. He figured it out the first time it was covered in his first year at the academy. Sitting down in his small area of the forest, Daffy closed his eyes and concentrated. He sat there for quite a while, his usual smile absent as he stared at the back of his eyelids. A half-hour passed and he was starting to get sore. Frustrated, he sat up quickly and opened his eyes. He was greeted by a dark, damp sewer, water serving as the floor. Daffy looked around slightly confused, concentrating his senses to figure out where he was. He was at an intersection in the sewer, tunnels in 4 different directions revealing nothing but darkness. Then, to his left, he heard it. Breathing. Slow and steady but easily identifiable. Hesitating for only a moment, Daffy placed his hands in his pockets and traveled closer to the sound. He didn't know how long he spent walking. Time felt almost skewed here, warped in a way. He wasn't sure how to explain it. Eventually though, he reached it. A very large room with an even larger gate, 2 metal frames with massive metal bars separating him from what lay inside. The gate was closed and near center of the gate was a single piece of paper, the seal. The inside of the gate was shrouded in darkness, hiding whatever it imprisoned, not that it was much of a mystery. A grin appearing on his face, Daffy walked up to the gate, stopping a few meters in front of it. As soon as he stopped, a claw emerged from the gate, rushing toward him and stopping a couple inches from his still grinning face, the gate stopping it from coming any further. Daffy expected as much, and he knew the claw wouldn't reach him from here. After all, he had seen it before. Seeing his attack miss, the fox pulled his hand back, the darkness that once shrouded the cage disappearing, revealing an enormous orange fox with 9 tails. Daffy looked up at the beast and heard a loud, deep voice come from him. "Well, if it isn't my little warden, I should kill you where you stand. But, this seal." The fox stopped for a moment glaring at Daffy, who was still looking up at him, as confident as ever. "Why are you here?" Doflamingo tilted his head for a moment, then began to laugh. "Ha ha ha ha. What's the matter, huh? Can't a guy come and visit an old friend, Tilda?" Daffy mused, eager to hear the beast's response. The fox intensified his glare, baring his teeth and growling at him now. "I do not have friends. Now, answer me. Why are you here?" The fox roared at the end, making Daffy plug his ears with his pinkies to withstand the volume. "That's pretty rude, ya know. Maybe I should come back later when you're in a better mood." "I know. I'll bring some chocolate with me next time. You like chocolate, right?" "Ha ha ha," Daffy said, bursting out in laughter at his own joke. This sent the fox over the top. He roared, sending Daffy flying back the way he came, with him laughing all the while. Soon enough, he was gone, and the fox huffed, laying his head back down for another nap, trying to get that smile out of his mind. Daffy, back at the forest, fell back world, suddenly laughing. A few seconds later he sat up, wiping a tear from his eye. My, he really is a rude one, ha ha ha. Chuckling slightly, Daffy decided to visit the rude little fox on a later date. For now, there was one more objective on his list. He had been trying to recreate his strings for many years now, being unsuccessful every time. But, he had realized something a few weeks ago. Before, he had been trying to will his strings to appear, letting his devil fruit do the hard work. He had never tried to use the new energy in his body, his chakra. He had started as soon as he had that revelation, and he was somewhat successful. He was able to create chakra strings, light blue strings that were apparently used in the hidden sand village's puppet techniques. It was close, but it wasn't what he wanted. He could feel that there was more, that he could create a true string. He extended his arm, concentrating his chakra at his middle finger. Instantly, a blue chakra string was there, waving in the slight breeze. He didn't stop there. He focused more and more chakra, the effort beginning to make Duffy sweat a bit, and closed his eyes in concentration. He sat there focusing all the chakra he could, and when he met his limit, he opened his eyes and grinned. A white string was there, waving in the slight breeze. The Hokage sat back in his chair, thinking about the events he just saw through his crystal ball. He had some free time today and decided to use it to check up on various ninja, including Naruto. When he first saw Naruto sitting there in the forest, he wasn't sure what to think. Curious, he kept observing and was very surprised when the 9-year-old boy suddenly fell back, bursting into laughter. Slightly bewildered, the aging ninja looked on, curious to see what he would do next. He was not disappointed. He was very well aware of the ability to create chakra strings, and of how most simply wrote them off as a puppeteer technique. Using chakra strings in battle was a subtle art, one that Hiruzen could see Naruto use very proficiently. That wasn't what shocked him though. It was what happened next. The boy continued to pour more and more chakra into the blue chakra string until, finally, something happened. It was slow at first, but, starting at the boy's fingertip, the thin blue string gained solidity, becoming a stark white. He had seen something similar to this before. Another Uzumaki who was also Naruto's mother. Her chakra chains were a powerful weapon that could restrain even tailed beasts. Just what these strings were capable of, Hiruzen didn't know, but the professor in him couldn't wait to see them in action. Kakashi was antsy. The last time he felt antsy was 3 years ago, when the Hokage booted him from Anbu. It was finally time. Naruto was graduating and he was going to lead his team. If he passed his test anyways. Getting dressed and exiting his apartment, Kakashi took out his book, began reading and made his way over to the academy building. He wasn't actually reading though, he had too much on his mind. That night 12 years ago still replaying in his mind. He remembered sitting there, forced to watch and pray that his sensei, the 4th Hokage, would be alright. But he wouldn't be alright. He remembered everything after that too. Throwing himself into Anbu, serving Danzo for a time until the 3rd had put him back on the right track. All that time and not once did he think of him, Naruto. He hated it, his past self that made mistake after mistake. He wondered what it would be like if things went differently. Those thoughts never lasted long. Shinobi didn't have time for regrets. So here he was, entering the academy and preparing to meet his team 3 whole hours behind schedule. He approached the classroom, opened the door and let himself in. Looking inside, and surprised to not hear any of the usual yelling at his tardiness, he saw his new cute little students, and quickly came up with something witty to say. How to put this? You guys are a little boring. The pink one frowned. The raven-haired one scowled. And the blonde one? He simply grinned. Sakura Haruno made her way to the academy, her head down, deep in thought. Today was the day. It was graduation day, where she would finally become a proper ninja and attain the rank of genin. The Sakura of the past, the one who had first joined the academy with her best friend, Ino Yamanaka, had always dreamed of this day. Now though, she didn't know what to think. Sakura was not cut out to be a ninja, she knew this. She spent all her time studying, learning as much as she could so she could slide by on her academics alone. While she did succeed in the end, it wasn't something she was proud of. Her grades allowed her to stay at the top of the aspiring kunoichi rankings, Iruka's class being heavily graded on academics as opposed to physical ability. Probably a way to help the non-clan children keep up with the clan heirs that seemed to take up half her class. But she knew that she wasn't the best kunoichi there. She may even be one of the worst. She constantly dreaded any of the spars the academy would hold, losing to almost any opponent in one-on-one combat. Test her in anything else, and she would shine. Whether it was creating elaborate traps or casting ninjutsu with almost perfect efficiency, that's where she was at her best. But put her in front of an opponent and it would all fall apart. These were not the only thoughts going through her head. She thought back to the time her best friend convinced her to go to the academy with her, Instead of the civilian school her parents wanted to send her. All the hours spent convincing her parents, and look where it led her. Ino Yamanaka, the one who helped her come out of her shell and her only friend, now her bitter rival. Arguing over the smallest things, always trying to get a leg up on the other. She hated it. She used to look up to her, wanted to be like her. Ino was popular, beautiful, confident, and Sakura envied it. She wanted to rise and become her equal. Now, she just wished things could go back to the way they were before, but the both of them were just too stubborn. She thought back to the one who started that downward spiral, Sasuke Uchiha. When she first saw him, she was enchanted. Sasuke was perfect in her eyes, popular, beautiful, and confident. The mysterious aura of the boy had only helped to draw her further in. She remembered talking about him to Ino, not yet having learned his name, and just trying to describe the boy. Her descriptions weren't very effective though, with Sakura always squealing slightly in embarrassment during them. Ino would do the same, also telling her about a boy she had developed a crush on. Yes, the day it all went downhill was when they both learned the boy's name. The day they both became bitter rivals. The term soured her thoughts, making her want to gag. Her thoughts drifting on her slow walk to the next turning point in her life. She thought of Sasuke, the popular, beautiful, and confident boy with the mysterious aura, the boy who she was enchanted with. What a joke. It didn't take long for that crush to begin to wane. As the years went by, her confidence lowered from the high they received thanks to Ino. Her fighting skills, her large forehead, the solitude of losing her best friend. It all just piled up. She was a fool to ever think she could win over Sasuke. There was never any chance, no hope that the stoic and cold boy would ever think of her as anything other than an annoyance. After all, she could barely speak 2 words to the boy. Where could social skills like that ever take her with the Sasuke Uchiha? No, the only reason she still even tried was because of Ino. Those fights the two had, pushing and shoving each other, scrambling to Sasuke's side was one of the few things she looked forward to anymore. Those brief moments together reminded her of better days. Sakura stopped for a moment, pausing to shake her head and lightly slap her hands against her cheeks, shaking the depressive thoughts from her mind. Continuing her walk, she quickly let her mind think of something else, the first thing popping up being one of her classmates, Naruto Uzumaki. When she thought of Naruto Uzumaki, her mind drew blanks. The boy was wild, boisterous, and probably a little insane. She didn't know what to think of the boy at first. She had chosen to speak to the boy one day, finding, despite his outward appearance, he was approachable compared to Sasuke. Naruto didn't glare at her, as if trying to chase her away with sheer force of will. Naruto didn't ignore her when she approached, pretending she wasn't there or acting like she was too insignificant to even acknowledge. Naruto wasn't a stoic and cold boy who she could barely speak 2 words to. Naruto wouldn't frown at the world, pushing away anyone and everyone who just wanted to help him, get closer to him, and just finally make a friendly connection with another human being after so long. Yes, when Sakura thought about the popular, beautiful, and confident Naruto Uzumaki, her mind just went blank. He had done it. Sasuke Uchiha had made his next step in his path. The path that would lead him to Itachi. The boy had trained and labored for countless hours, throwing everything he had at whatever challenge he decided to put himself through on that particular day. Whenever he would tire, whenever he would slow down in his efforts, his eyes closing, resting for just a moment, the darkness that the action brought would show him the blood of his family, and his eyes would snap open. Yes, Sasuke Uchiha had spent blood, sweat, and tears to be able to sit here, waiting to be assigned to a team. If only his clan didn't have to spend their blood as well. Sasuke looked at the row in front of him as Iruka continued his speech, staring at the aggravating worm that was Naruto Uzumaki. He was leaning back in his chair, his legs spread out onto the desk in front of him, clearly bothering the 2 students next to him. His hands were folded behind his head and, although he couldn't see it, he knew that he had that smile on his face. His clothes were just as unusual as the ones from his childhood. He wore a white, thin, long-sleeved t-shirt. It hung loosely on his body, with an open front revealing fishnet armor across his torso. He wore bright red pants with pink tiger stripes on them. The pants themselves seemed almost too short, stopping a little past his knees. On his feet were not the traditional shinobi sandals, but instead, black dress shoes, the toes curving up slightly and coming together in a V shape. Naruto had grown too, now standing a few inches above himself. At first, when Naruto had defeated him so easily all those years ago, he had been excited. He thought he found someone who took the life of the ninja seriously, who worked just as hard and knew the same struggles. But no, Naruto Uzumaki was just a damn clown. A clown who didn't pay attention to every lesson diligently. An idiot that didn't work his ass off for every ounce of strength. A moron, who was the best around by sheer talent alone. Naruto Uzumaki was just another prodigy, just like him. Sasuke, feeling his teeth begin to grind together, relaxed his body, letting the frustration he felt leave him. It was just in time as Iruka had just called his name, finishing his boring little speech and grouping the students into three-man teams. He listened carefully for the next name to be called, slightly wary to hear who his teammates were going to be. Sakura Haruno. Sakura, the pink one. Sasuke knew her well. The girl was enamored with him, as were many other girls in his class. He didn't know why either, he would always just ignore them and brush them aside, trying to tell them that he just wasn't interested in any of them. The message would never get through. Still, there was worse he could be teamed up with. As useless as the girl was in combat, if her spars were any indication, she was knowledgeable and intelligent, two important factors that could decide any battle. Yes, Sasuke Uchiha could work with Sakura Haruno. Naruto Uzumaki. The frustration returned. His teeth clenched as he released a small hiss through his teeth. His eyes widened in both shock and anger while his hands, folded in front of his face in his usual pose, balled into one large fist, causing the bones inside to pop. He looked down at the boy and his breath caught. Naruto leaned his head backward, staring back at him, that ever-present grin mocking him. Worse, he could hear it. That strange laughter that should have been so quiet, almost inaudible, echoing loudly inside his head. Sasuke's hands relaxed, unfolding from the fist they had formed, his teeth unclenched and he looked back up to the front of the class, ignoring Naruto while watching Iruka as he rattled off the other team formations, eventually releasing the breath caught in his throat. Sasuke sat in his seat, waiting for their sensei to arrive. Iruka had eventually left the room as various jonin came to gather their teams. 10 minutes had passed and their new leader had yet to arrive. Sasuke still refused to look at Naruto, staring directly ahead of him at the chalkboard on the opposite wall. At the 1 hour mark Sasuke had decided to simply close his eyes, the room staying quiet almost the entire time. The three of them, Sasuke, Sakura and Naruto, continued to wait in the classroom, everyone else having already left long ago. Sasuke, with his eyes still closed, listened to his new teammates. Naruto had decided to start chewing some gum to pass the time, making the majority of the noise in the room considering he chewed only with his teeth, his toothed smile never breaking. He could hear Sakura scribbling on a piece of paper, writing notes or perhaps drawing something. He had often saw her doodling during class but the girl was very secretive about them. Her hands always cupped around her pencil as she worked, hiding the drawing from any prying eyes. Almost 3 hours now. Sasuke considered himself to be patient and strong-willed but now, sitting here completely still to maintain his image was beginning to wear on his willpower. Sasuke had opened his eyes every now and then, looking at his teammates to see what they were doing, trying to alleviate his own boredom. Sakura had, at some point, stopped her doodling and sat next to Naruto, the two conversing. Well, sort of. It wasn't much of a conversation really. Sakura would simply just start talking to him, from topics ranging from what she had done days before to what she ate for dinner last night, seemingly rambling. Naruto wasn't ignoring her though, simply taking the role of the silent listener. He would laugh every now and then and answer some of her questions with a simple yes or no, rarely ever truly contributing to the conversation. Sasuke watched the two of them. Sakura, rambling on and on while Naruto sat there, listening and nodding every now and then. He noticed something, looking at Sakura. He had seen her smile before, often being the one they were directed at. He just noticed through Sakura's droning that she was smiling, but it was different. He remembered her smile being a subtle thing. A lipped smile that was often accompanied by a slight tilt of the head, an attempt to look cute, no doubt. This was different. It was just a bit wider, just a bit larger, slightly showing her teeth. Her head seemed to hunch over slightly as she talked, her posture different than what he remembered. It looked familiar. The classroom door began to slide open, Sasuke's thoughts coming to a screeching halt. A man, a ninja, walked in. The man was strange. Gray, silver, spiky hair stood tall upon his head. His face was almost completely covered, revealing only his right eye, expressing utter boredom. The unimpressive man slouched slightly, an orange book held in his hand as he slowly entered the room, slowly looking at the three of them as he finally spoke. How to put this? You guys are a little boring. Sasuke scowled. This was their sensei? Was he really an elite ninja? The room was silent for a moment before the man spoke again. Meet me on the roof. With his piece said, the man vanished in a small puff of smoke. Naruto moved first, hopping over the desk. He put his hands in his pockets and made his way out the classroom, heading toward the roof. Sakura quickly made to follow him. Sasuke got up, taking a moment to stretch, the blood quickly flowing back into his limbs after he sat mostly still for almost 3 hours. He made his way to the rooftop and, opening the door, saw the rest of his team. Their new teacher was leaning up against the railing on the side of the building, Naruto and Sakura sitting in front of him. Sasuke joined them, deciding to sit next to Sakura, away from Naruto. Well, now that we're all here, why don't we start by introducing ourselves? The man said, sounding as if he would rather be doing anything else. You introduce ourselves, sensei? Sakura asked, as if confused on what she was supposed to do. Yeah, the man replied, you know, your likes, dislikes, hobbies, dreams for the future tilde. That sort of thing, he continued, looking at the book in his hand and turning to the next page. A laugh came from his left, a voice following soon after. Heh heh heh. Yeah no, it's usually proper etiquette to introduce yourself to others first. I thought even old guys like you would know that much. The man looked up from his book to look at Naruto silent for a moment. Then, he sighed, snapping his book shut. Very well, I'm Kakashi Hitaki, he said, bringing a single finger to his chin, as if in thought. As for my likes. I don't really feel like telling you guys that, he said, nodding at himself. As for dislikes. Well, who knows, he continued shrugging his shoulders. As for hobbies. I have lots of hobbies, his voice was confident at the end there, and dreams for the future tilde. Huh, never really thought about it. He finished, almost like he had some revelation. He glared slightly at Naruto. And I'm only 26, for your information. Naruto simply laughed lightly in response. Now, your turn, the pink one. Kakashi's finger pointing directly at Sakura as he rested his chin in the palm of his other hand. Sakura made a small squeak, surprised at suddenly being the center of attention. Oh, well, you Her voice was shaking, struggling with the simple introduction. Well, I'm Sakura and I like you. Lots of things yeah, she said at the end, sounding like she was convincing herself. Things like reading and studying and draw. She cut herself off, pausing for a second before continuing. Anyways, I don't like spicy foods, I guess, and I don't really have many hobbies. The girl's mood went from nervous to slightly downtrodden before perking up again. But my dream is to be a really good ninja. The girl was smiling brightly at Kakashi, who, after a moment, nodded and pointed at Naruto next. Now, the vibrant one. Naruto sat there for a second, chuckling before beginning his introduction. Who, little ol' me? Well, I'm Naruto of course. Naruto had raised his arms in the air dramatically, emphasizing his words. As for my likes, those are confidential of course. Can't have anyone knowing about those, ya see. Heh heh heh, he said, wagging his finger as if that were obvious. As for dislikes. Naruto's smile shrunk a little, something Sasuke never thought he would see. He looked closer at Naruto, slightly nervous at what would happen next. His smile returned again, wider this time. Veins began to show in his forehead, wriggling slightly under his skin as if he were clenching his teeth with unbelievable strength. Sasuke had never seen him so angry, and he braced himself to hear what Naruto, the carefree and always smiling boy, would hate so much. Barbecues. He nearly fell over, not prepared for the ridiculous answer. Not waiting for him to recover, Naruto continued. As for hobbies, I often spend my time being better than Sasuke. It's fun, easy to do and, best of all, free. He turned towards Sakura. You should really try it sometime, Pinky. Heh heh heh. Sakura chuckled nervously with him, looking very uncomfortable. Sasuke was, very slowly, counting down from 10, using everything he could to remain calm and not lunge at the other boy. I see, Kakashi said, watching the interactions between them. And your dreams for the future? Naruto grinned. That's a secret. Heh heh heh, he replied, chuckling quietly. Kakashi looked away from the blonde and turned toward him. Alright, your turn, he said with that dull tone of voice. Sasuke calmed himself, taking a small breath before repeating the small speech he had thought up while the others were doing their introductions. My name is Sasuke Uchiha. I hate a lot of things, and I don't particularly like anything, he said, keeping his flat and monotone. What I have is not a dream, because I will make it a reality. I'm going to restore my clan, and kill a certain someone, he ended mysteriously. With his small speech over, Sasuke looked up at Kakashi, waiting for him to continue. He refused to look at the others' reaction to his introduction, especially at Naruto's damn smile. But if Sasuke had looked to his left, he would see that Naruto was not smiling. Daffy made his way back to his apartment, thinking about his team and the survival exercise that Kakashi had told them about. He wasn't very surprised that there was another test to take before he became a genin. The graduation exam had been far too easy. Needless to say, he was excited. He had never fought this land's elite ninja, and he was curious about what they were capable of. Thinking back to his team, his thoughts drifted to the pink one, Sakura. In his first life, he had taken many under his wing and into his family. A large number of them had issues. That being said, he got the same feeling from Sakura as he did from them. Sakura Haruno was a lonely girl. He would watch as she constantly vied for Sasuke's attention, competing against the other girls. It was something that had been going on since they all had entered the academy. It became a routine after a while, watching her and the other girl, Ino, rush through the halls, trying to be the first to sit next to the boy. Then, one day, something had changed. Sakura had decided to come up to him one day, during lunch, and tried to converse with him. He was a little surprised at first. While he was by no means a social shut-in at the academy, his position as top student ensuring he was quite popular in school, Sakura had never shown any interest in him before. Duffy simply sat there for a bit, listening to the girl ramble on. Eventually, this would eventually happen more and more frequently. When it first started, Sakura would barely look at him when she talked, merely glancing up at him every now and then before looking at the ground again, her voice stuttering and nervous. Eventually though, she grew more confident in their conversations, now looking directly into his eyes, without a hint of nervousness. Duffy, for once, didn't quite know what to do. It wasn't the first time some damaged or orphaned child would attach themselves to him like this. Perhaps it was some strange charisma he possessed. Before, Duffy would abuse the connection, using it to absorb others into his family. Don't get him wrong, it wasn't like he didn't care about them. No, it was quite the opposite. Those children became his family, and family was all he had. But things were different now. Before, his family had a clear purpose in his mind. The destruction of everything the celestial dragons loved, with no stone unturned. But now, he didn't even know if the celestial dragons even existed anymore. Sure, he had seen the map of this continent, it being completely unfamiliar, but that proved nothing. It would not be outside the realm of possibility for this land to be just another undiscovered island in the New World. But that possibility seemed to get smaller and smaller as the years went by. It was a doubt that was always in his mind, a whisper that never quite went away, telling him that the people he hated with every fiber of his being could already be dead, and he would never be able to seize his revenge with his own hands. That's why Sasuke's little speech had gotten to him. He saw a bit of himself in the boy, and he knew where his own quest for revenge had brought him. He lost everything. Could he let the same happen to Sasuke? So, there was the dilemma. If he built his family again, what would he do? Would he repeat history, ask them to risk everything for him, just to feed the hate in his heart, desperately searching for an enemy that may no longer exist? Or, would he build it up again, but protect them, risk everything for them instead? Doflamingo just didn't know, his hate still ran too deep. Daffy opened the door to his apartment, walked in and closed the door behind him. He had a test to prepare for. He buttoned up the rest of his white trench coat, using his hands to smooth out the small wrinkles that had appeared. Finishing that, Virgo put his shoes on, exited his apartment and made his way toward Team Guy's exclusive training ground. Daffy had already left earlier that morning to attend his final graduation exam. Normally Virgo would have left at around the same time, but Guy-sensei wished to start their team training session a bit later than usual today. Virgo thought about Daffy and the past few years that the two had spent together. He remembered how relieved he had when he first saw him, sitting on that bench as if it were just another day. He had spent 6 years in his new life by then, utterly lost without his cane. To have Daffy return to him was truly a miracle in Virgo's eyes. He thought back to the event that would follow that day, when he had raised his fists against his friend. That had been one of the hardest decisions he had ever made. He remembered the way his fists, usually adamant and unyielding, trembled and shook. Virgo did not enjoy harming his cane. But it had to be done. Doflamingo had to become stronger than he was before, and Virgo was the only one that could ensure that he did. Virgo thought back to the rest of his family, to Diamante, Trebol and Pica. When Daffy had given him his mission to infiltrate deep into the Navy's military ranks, he had been ecstatic. To know that Daffy trusted only him to do something so important meant everything to him. But that mission, the one he would have been assigned to until his death, had been the hardest thing he had ever done. The constant separation from his family wore on him, making each day go by slower and slower. Sometimes, he would have to go years without any contact with them. Being honest, a small part of him was sometimes afraid that his family had forgotten him. That was why, in his last moments when Daffy had thanked him, he was so happy. Because he could feel it, in the way he spoke and in his very words. Daffy had never thanked anyone before, and his words told him that those years of separation had hurt him too. So, Virgo smiled, content with the way his life would come to a close. And now, here they were, just the two of them against an unfamiliar world with unfamiliar rules. Without the rest of the family, Virgo knew they had to be stronger. So they trained. The first time they had trained, Virgo had a distinct advantage. He was far more comfortable with regular hand-to-hand combat, and Daffy had been quite crippled against him without his strings. As the years went by, that gap swiftly began to close. Daffy began to create his own way of fighting, using unorthodox angles of attack, often employing his legs to surprise and severely harm his opponent, in this case Virgo. From suddenly flipping into a handstand, and kicking toward his head, to quickly dropping low to the ground and delivering devastating vertical kicks. The fighting style was, somehow, slightly familiar, but Virgo was never able to make the connection. After a while, the Daffy became extremely skilled in the art of close-quarters combat, but Virgo could still beat him if he went all out. That quickly changed when he had rediscovered his strings. When Daffy had shown him that he was able to recreate his strings, he was shocked and eager to see what he could do now, allowing Daffy to use him as a test dummy. It became quite clear that these strings were different than the ones he given to him by his devil fruit, with some abilities seemingly out of his reach, at least for now. For one, Daffy's main ability to change some of the properties of his strings seemed to be gone. These properties were things such as their temperature or the ability to reflect light. This made Daffy's overheat and 5 chromatic strings attack unavailable for now. Also gone was his awakening ability, but this wasn't much of a surprise. Besides that, Daffy's strings were as strong as ever, able to do almost everything they could before. The only thing holding them back was the amount of chakra he possessed. Virgo snorted to himself lightly at that thought. Everything in this land relied on chakra, so having a large amount to work with was a key advantage. Daffy's chakra seemed to have almost no limit, the only thing ever stopping him being genuine exhaustion. Virgo was a little jealous, honestly. After unlocking his strings, Daffy became a nightmare fight, incorporating them into his fighting style. He would attach the strings to himself and the clouds or surrounding environment, allowing him to simulate floating in the air. He would use this weightlessness to launch heavy kicks that could strike from any direction, and dodge almost any attack, his ability to dodge no longer being restricted by gravity. His strings would often be scattered around the area, often surrounding his opponents. They were razor sharp, and threatened to instantly decapitate someone who wasn't paying attention. Yes, Daffy had gotten much stronger. Virgo walked onto the grassy field, toward his teammates who were already in the clearing. He watched as Rock Lee entered the clearing, his hands behind his back and remnants of his breakfast glued to the side of his face. Neji Hyuga did not know what to think of the boy named simply Rock Lee. He often thought of himself as a rather stoic human being, taking everything in stride with utter seriousness and determination that would never waver. Seeing Rock Lee made him doubt that image. Lee's face was almost carved from stone, never changing even when their sensei would accidentally send him through a tree in a training session with a bit too much youth. Lee was someone who was forged from steel, and that made Neji wary of him. In his eyes, Rock Lee was an anomaly. Everything he had learned in his life told him that the young orphan who had nothing, right from the beginning, should have stayed just that, nothing. But no, Rock Lee was anything but that. He had talent, strength, and the determination to use them to break any obstacle in his way. It went against everything Neji believed in and he refused to accept it. As Lee approached, showing up the same way he always did, exactly on time and not a second early, he turned to Might Guy, an idea forming in his mind. "Guy-sensei," he said, grabbing the older mont's attention. Might Guy was a strange man, dressed in a bright green jumpsuit and orange leg warmers. The man may look like a clown, but he was strong, a master of his craft, taijutsu, and for that he had Neji's respect. Guy looked down toward him, his attention being taken away from Lee's approach. "Huh, what is Neji?" he asked, curiously. Neji continued on. "I'd like to propose something, a spar between Lee and I," he said, keeping his voice flat. "We're both strong fighters and I think both of us would benefit greatly from it." Neji made sure to keep his voice and face as calm as he could. One would think that the two would have sparred before, the two being on a team for a year now. But no, Guy-sensei would often take it upon himself to be their sparring partner instead. His absolute mastery of various martial arts making sure they never got too comfortable. Neji suspected that his teacher knew that he did not like Rock Lee, and that was why he would never let them spar. Guy looked down on Neji for a moment and thought. Eventually, he nodded, then revealed a bright white smile. One of his hands offered a big thumbs up and his smile produced a bright twinkle. "All right. But it'll be after today's exercises. We'll have a hard time getting through them if you two are all black and blue." With that, Lee arrived on the field, and the team prepared for Guy's grueling workout. The two stood a few feet apart, facing each other, bodies tensed as they waited for the match to start. Neji, his hands out and both palms facing his opponent. Lee, his hands neatly folded behind his back, his sunglasses hiding his expression. Might Guy eyed his two students, wondering if he was doing the right thing. The two had great potential, and he could see himself taking either of them on as a true apprentice of his. But there were things that held him back. First was Neji. He was a true prodigy of the Hyuga clan, already showing masterful use of their gentle fist techniques. What made Guy hesitate was Neji's beliefs, that hard work is useless and only those who were destined for strength could achieve it. That mentality went against everything Guy believed in. Then there was Lee. Being honest, Lee was more suitable to take up Guy's mantle, his current fighting style relying on the same thing as his strong fist, using overwhelming physical force to break his opponents. In that aspect, Lee would make the perfect student, if it wasn't for one thing, if it wasn't for how utterly ruthless the boy was. He had been with many missions with his team, and he remembered the first time he grabbed a genin's first most difficult assignment. Their first time having to end another's life. The mission was to eliminate a small group of bandits located a few days out from the village. He never did understand that. Why would normal criminals choose to operate so close to a place where its children were trained assassins? He would never figure it out. Anyways, they had arrived at the bandits' camp in the dead of night, Guy scouting the area to ensure there were no shinobi among them. He let his students loose, not taking a single opponent himself and relying on his students to finish the job. Tenten had the worst time with it, her weapons revealing copious amounts of blood. She was the most hesitant one, and afterwards had spent days cleaning the weapons she used on this particular night. Neji was the quickest, his gentle fist quickly and efficiently taking his enemies down. Neji's face was as stoic as ever, but Guy could see a faraway look in his eyes after his battle was done. Lee was the slowest, but not out of incompetence or skill. The three of them watched. The man was screaming, laying on the ground with the remains of his arm outstretched toward them, as if asking for help. A moment later, Guy realized that he was asking for help, his screams making him almost incomprehensible. Lee stood over him, his hands curled into fists as they thundered into the man. His punches had a slow and rhythmic pace to them, the sound of shattered bones and tearing flesh echoing across the camp every time they hammered down. Watching, Guy realized with horror that Lee wasn't just attacking aimlessly. No, every punch was aimed with perfect precision, designed to keep the man alive until the very last moment. Soon, the screams had stopped. The arm that had been extended toward them had gone limp. He was dead. Lee stood there for a moment, frozen as his fist was reared back, prepared to deliver another crippling blow. Slowly, he adjusted his sunglasses, then folded his hand behind his back and walked toward his team. The team made camp not too far from the bandits. Deciding not to travel home by night, they decided to rest and try and forget about today. Guy, throughout the night, remembered something. His attention had mostly been fixed on Tenten, as he was most worried about her since she was the least skilled out of the three. Still, he was pretty sure Lee would have had to fight more than one opponent. Sneaking away from his team for a brief moment, he made his way back to the camp to take a look around. He had found them, 3 bandits, all dead inside one of the tents. Small, coin-sized holes had been drilled into their forearm. Do you think this is a good idea, Sensei? The voice interrupted his thoughts, bringing him back to the grassy field. He looked down to his left and saw Tenten, the one who spoke, looking up at him nervously. Guy flashed a quick smile at the girl, trying to reassure her. There's nothing to worry about. It's just a friendly little spar, nothing more. With that said, he looked at his 2 students, and gave the signal. Neji started the fight, something that was quite unusual. His palms, as quick as lightning, raced toward Lee, who hadn't budged. Just before the first palm made contact, Lee moved. He had never seen anything like it. Lee's body seemed to almost float, bending around Neji's attacks as if he were as malleable as a leaf. Neji resumed his attack, not wanting to give Lee the chance to begin a counter-assault. His attacks quickened but they never met their target. He could see it. Neji's eyes, fierce and surrounded by bulging veins, signaling the use of his Byakugan, began to fill with anger. His attacks became wilder, sacrificing technique and accuracy for speed, desperately trying to touch Lee's seemingly untouchable form. A fist rocketed out from behind Lee's back, not giving Neji any chance of blocking or avoiding it. It slammed into Neji, his solar plexus, with an almost audible crash, stopping Neji dead in his tracks. Neji's hands were still outstretched. A palm stopped just inches away from Lee's neck. His face was blank, eyes unfocused. Then, he slumped over Lee's fist, his arms falling limply to his sides. Lee grabbed hold of him as he fell, gently laying the unconscious boy onto the ground. Guy walked over to Neji, examining him and confirming that there was no lasting damage. He looked at Lee, watching his impassive face. "Good job, Lee. That was very impressive." Lee simply nodded, and Guy scooped Neji into his arms, lifting him up. "Today's practice is over for today. You guys get some rest. I'm going to take Neji back home to the Hyuga compound." His 2 students nodded, and Guy rocketed off, heading to Neji's home, hoping that the Hyuga weren't too mad or curious on how their prodigy ended up like this. Guy thought about the fight, still wondering if it was the right decision to make. Hopefully, Neji would learn something from this fight, that destiny wasn't everything. Maybe then, he could take Neji on as his apprentice. He knew one thing though. He would never teach Rock Lee his strong fist style, no matter what. This weirdly dressed guy is surprisingly hard to keep track of, thought 8-year-old Konohamaru Sarutobi. He was bored out of his mind today. Udon was busy studying, Moegi was out shopping with her mom, and Konohamaru was not in the mood to hear Ebisu's lectures. Wandering around the village he was named after, he came across a rather interesting sight. He was kind of funny looking, the way he kind of waddled along, almost bull-legged and with a big grin on his face, almost as if he were laughing at something. His clothes were rather fancy looking, exotic in a way, and Konohamaru couldn't help but notice the ninja headband, tied loosely around his waist. This was an opportunity. A chance to see an awesome-looking, young ninja at work, and Konohamaru didn't waste the chance at potentially alleviating his boredom. He began to follow the boy, like an untraceable shadow, hiding behind street lamps and staying hidden under his square-shaped fake rock. He was the very definition of stealth. As he followed, the blonde boy suddenly sped up and turned to the left, entering a small alleyway. Startled and not wanting to lose him, Konohamaru got out from under his clever disguise and ran into the alley. It was empty. Confused, he walked forward into the alleyway, looking around for any super-secret ninja passageways that the boy may have used. Suddenly, a sharp string came from face, making the boy cry out and fall backwards. Instinctively, he put a finger to the spot, feeling something wet and warm. Pulling his hand back, saw his fingers were slightly wet with blood. He looked up from his position on the ground, and could barely out a thin white line, stretched across the alleyway at head level. Is that some kind of wire? He thought, confused. Heh, you should be more careful on who you follow. You never know who they might turn out to be. Crying out in alarm, Konohamaru scrambled forward, under the mystery wire and away from the voice that came from behind him. Quickly getting up and turning around, he saw the boy he was following, grinning at him and chuckling to himself. Konohamaru was quick to reply. Hey, were you the one who put that weird wire there? He cried out, finger pointed accusingly, trying to steady his rapid heart. The boy laughed. And what if I was? What are ya gonna do about it? He said, leaning down and glaring at the boy. Konohamaru made an audible gulp. I'll, tell my grandpa. Yeah, that's what I'll do. And then you're gonna be in a lot of trouble, you hear me? He said with false bravado. The boy chuckled slightly. Well, we wouldn't want that now, would we? My name's Naruto, what's yours, kid? Konohamaru, steeling himself, replied, I'm Konohamaru, grandson of the great third Hokage. He half expected Naruto to quickly apologize, the grin falling off his face as he realized just who he had attacked. He was wrong. His grin widened as he began to laugh. Well, Konohamaru, tell you what. Why don't we forget about this little ordeal and, in return, I'll owe you a favor. Naruto extended his hand, the wire separating them disappearing. Deal? Konohamaru stood there and shook. Wordlessly, he took the other boy's hand and gave it a shake. Excellent, now, I've places to be, he said, turning around and walking out the alleyway. See ya around, Konohamaru. He called back, waving his hand in the air to say goodbye. Konohamaru just watched as Naruto rounded the corner, disappearing from view. He said my name. With that thought, Konohamaru dashed out of the alleyway, intent on visiting his grandfather to beg him for a new wardrobe. Those clothes of Naruto's did look really cool. Continuing his steady pace, Kakashi Hitaki made his way toward Training Ground 7, eager to test his new students and see if they were worthy of graduating. He snorted slightly at the sarcastic thought. Failing Team 7 was an impossibility, he knew that. A team that had the last loyal Uchiha and Naruto Uzumaki, the Nine-Tails Jinchuriki, was destined to pass. The higher echelons of the village would make sure of that. They were both too important to simply boot out of the program. The third had a hard enough time ensuring that they didn't graduate ahead of schedule, after the last young graduate came down with a severe case of parasite. No, failing Team 7 was not gonna happen. Still, the rest of Team 7 didn't have to know that particular detail. Now coming close to the rendezvous point, Kakashi thought of the individual members of his team. First, there was Sakura Haruno, a jumble of psychological issues if he had ever seen one, and coming from him that was saying a lot. Severe depression, attachment issues, low self-esteem and body dysmorphic disorders centered around the size of her forehead. Kakashi didn't know what the Hokage was thinking assigning her to this team. But, then again, who else but Sakura Haruno? The other non-clan children would have even less of a chance keeping up with Naruto and Sasuke. The other clan heir teams were designed with specific purposes in mind, teaching skills that its members would be talented in to help them flourish as ninja. Team 7, meanwhile, was a rather ragtag group. No specialization and no purpose, the misfits. Kakashi's team had been the same and so had Jiraiya's. Team 7 was where the misfits, who didn't belong anywhere else, would gather. Kakashi sighed as he thought of his next student, Sasuke Uchiha. He felt a small connection to the boy, reminding him of his younger self. Young, talented and angry at the world, only finding enjoyment on reaching the next level of strength. A young Kakashi could definitely relate. But Sasuke had something that young Kakashi didn't, a rival. Someone who could push him to greater heights and form a connection with. Yes, Kakashi could see the one-sided rivalry between Sasuke and Naruto was very important. Without Naruto, Sasuke would eventually separate himself from everyone in the Leaf, driving him further and further away. He was a very antisocial boy, with tunnel-like vision focused on reaching Itachi's level of strength. But his connection with Naruto served as a good way to keep Sasuke grounded, to keep him from becoming a potential flight risk. A good move on the Hokage's part. His thoughts were brought to Naruto, the son of the man that Kakashi had viewed as a second father, a pseudo-step-brother of his. Naruto was a very unique individual. He had made quirks and was a very carefree person. Kakashi thought that he would be like a mix between Minato and Kushina, but no, Naruto was his own special kind of person. If he inherited anything from them, it would be talent. Naruto was a prodigy through and through. He simply glided on by in the academy with minimal effort. According to the reports he had read, Naruto was a powerful fighter. He was clever and a formidable strategist, with a malleable mind that thought outside the box. He was looking forward to this test and the chance to see him in action for himself. Finally arriving at the clearing, he spotted his team sitting near the memorial stone, waiting for his arrival. Speeding up, he suddenly appeared in front of them, his eye cracking a smile as he gently waved at them. Yo! His students simply looked up at him, Sakura managing to get a greeting out. Oh, good morning sensei. Kakashi's sweat dropped. The funnest part about showing up 3 hours late to everything was the reactions for when he finally arrived. They were making this rather boring for him. Yes, well let's get started shall we? He said, walking up to one of the 3 wooden posts nearby. Reaching into his pouch, he grabbed an alarm clock, set it for noon, 2 hours from now, and placed it atop the center post. He guided his students away from the memorial stone and near the center of the clearing. Turning to his students, he pulled out 2 silver bells and held them in front of his face. Your test is rather simple. I will have these 2 bells, tied to my waist, your objective being to retrieve them. By noon, when the alarm goes off, those who still have a bell will pass, the ones who don't will be sent back to the academy. Sakura suddenly had an alarmed look on her face, panicked. But sensei, there are only 2 bells. Kakashi smiled, very good Sakura, meaning that, at most, only 2 of you will pass this test. We'll begin on my mark. Kakashi waited for a moment, looking at his students. Sakura was shaking slightly, clearly nervous. Sasuke had a glare aimed toward him, his body tensed with a hand near the pouch around his waist. Naruto simply stood there, grinning at him. Start. With that, Sasuke and Sakura promptly disappeared, taking cover in the surrounding forest while trying to think of a plan to steal the bells. Naruto was still standing there. Heh. This is quite the test, old guy. Very clever. Kakashi's eyebrow twitched at the old guy remark, reading into his words. So, he already figured it out, huh? Yeah, he's definitely your son, sensei. Before he could reply, Naruto continued. Still, a test as simple as this is pretty boring, old guy. Let's liven it up. Naruto's grin spreading, he quickly rushed toward Kakashi, who raised his guard. Naruto delivered a high kick, his height only letting it reach up to his chest. Kakashi lowered himself slightly, getting into a better stance to block the attack and prepared to bat the light kick away with his forearm. Things happened a bit differently. The kick had far more power in it than he had expected, almost throwing Kakashi aside, as he slid a few inches away due to the kick's force. Naruto then turned, making a small hop as he sent his other leg to meet the first, kicking the same spot. Just before his second leg made impact, Kakashi focused on the first leg, still being blocked by his forearm, and grabbed a hold of Naruto's ankle, throwing him away from him. He didn't fly far, as Kakashi saw something he had never seen in all his years as a ninja. Adjusting himself, Naruto recovered and then seemed to stop himself in midair, his legs bending as if he were touching some invisible force. Naruto kicked off the air, rocketing toward him. Kakashi, right before Naruto made contact with him, fell backwards into a condensed handstand, using his hands to push off the ground and plant his feet into Naruto's body, who was now hovering over him. Again, something strange happened. Naruto dodged, his body seemingly floating in midair as he was now at Kakashi's side, already launching a kick toward his unprotected side. Exerting more strength, Kakashi continued his initial attack, using it to launch himself in the air and dodge Naruto's attack. Quickly landing on the ground, he hopped back and examined Naruto, trying to figure out how he was seemingly flying. Naruto slowly lowered to the ground, his feet firmly back on the ground. The two watched each other for a moment before Naruto let out a loud laugh. Heh. My, you really are a Jonin, aren't you? Gotta say, I was curious how strong an elite ninja was, and I'm not disappointed. All that and you're still holding back, not a scratch on ya. Impressive. Kakashi digested his words before relaxing his body, lowering his guard. The same to you as well, Naruto. I had heard you were talented, but that really was something else. I assume you already know the purpose of this test? Naruto chuckled slightly. Oh yeah, the old man would tell stories of it, ya know? How the first Hokage used it to teach him and his team about teamwork. I knew it as soon you brought out the bells. Kakashi sighed as he translated "old man" to third Hokage. Not even thinking about how Naruto would call both the third and him old, he made a request. Very well, do you mind staying out of this for a bit then? I'm curious to see what Sasuke and Sakura do next. Naruto was silent for a moment, his smile falling for a moment as a thoughtful expression took over his face. Then it returned. Heh. You can't even fail us if you wanted to, could you, old guy? Naruto said quietly, no doubt making sure the others couldn't overhear him. Before he could answer, Naruto continued. Well, whatever, guess I'll go take a nap then, come find me when you're done playing. Naruto disappeared afterward, leaving Kakashi alone in the clearing. He sighed, he got the feeling it was going to be a long day. Sasuke Uchiha had watched from his hiding spot in the trees. Watched as Naruto went toe-to-toe with a Jonin. He felt his anger rise, his pride wounded as it demanded to march down there and prove himself just as capable. Sasuke held himself back though, knowing that going in hot-headed would just lead to his defeat. Deciding to wait and follow the Jonin, who was currently walking along a path in the forest, searching for them. After a few moments, a strategy in mind, Sasuke struck. Releasing a spool of ninja wire, he wrapped it around Kakashi, who had a look of surprise on his face, pulled the wire taut to stop his movements and made a grab for a bell. Just before his hand made contact, there was a poof of smoke, Kakashi, revealing himself to just be a rather detailed scarecrow. A substitution, he thought, dashing back into the forest. He made a run for it and headed back into the clearing. A few seconds later he arrived, and turned toward the forest behind him, looking for signs of movement. A good try, but you'll need to do better than that if you want one of these bells. Sasuke turned around quickly, a kunai in hand as he raised his guard and focused on his opponent. Kakashi merely raised his only visible eyebrow, taking one of his hands out of his pockets. He made a "come hither" motion with his hand. It worked, as Sasuke kicked of the ground, rushing toward him and throwing his kunai at his sensei's head. Kakashi plucked the kunai out of the air with the same hand, as Sasuke made several hand seals that, judging by the look he made, Kakashi recognized. Fire style. Fireball jutsu. After, releasing a stream of flames from his mouth, Sasuke stood there waiting for the smoke to clear and reveal his sensei's charred body. The smoke cleared. There was no one there. Looking around frantically, Sasuke searched for his sensei, listening for any indication of him. Where will he come from? Behind? Above maybe? Kakashi answered his thoughts. Below. A pair of hands reached out from the ground, grabbing Sasuke's ankles and pulling him toward the earth. When it was over with, Sasuke was almost completely buried in the ground, only his head visible. Spitting some dirt out of his mouth, Sasuke looked up to see Kakashi staring down at him. Earth style. Headhunter jutsu, he said simply. Sasuke growled at him, humiliated and struggling to get free. You're pretty good, Sasuke, but not quite on Naruto's level yet. Sasuke's struggles came to a stop, taking in his sensei's words. Ta-ta. Kakashi vanished in a puff of smoke, leaving Sasuke in the ground. Sasuke had stopped moving, still processing Kakashi's words. Anger was slowly starting to boil in his mind. Picturing Naruto laughing at him, mocking him as he stayed one step ahead at every turn. He remembered Naruto's fight with Kakashi, and his anger disappeared. Sasuke looked up to blue cloudy sky, content for a moment, basking in his small revelation. He was right, he just wasn't at Naruto's level, yet. Soon enough 2 hours had passed, with Daphne napping in front of the memorial stone. The alarm went off, waking him from his slumber. Yawning, he stretched and looked around. Walking toward him was the rest of his team. Sasuke and Sakura walking with Kakashi, their heads down and a shameful look on their faces. Finally reaching Daffy, the three young students sat down, looking up at Kakashi to hear their results. Naruto spoke first. "So old guy, how'd they do?" Kakashi looked at him for a moment. "They failed," he said simply, disappointment evident in his voice. Sasuke and Sakura both lowered their heads. "You two failed to see the true purpose of this test. This was not about proving yourselves in a trial by combat, showing that you're the strongest. It was about teamwork." The two looked up while Daffy watched their reactions. Teamwork?" Sakura said, slightly confused. Kakashi sighed, exasperated. "Yes. Did you really think that either one of you would be able to defeat me, a Jonin? You're still just fresh new genin. The only way you would have succeeded was to work together. But there were only two bells. Even if we worked together, someone would still fail," Sasuke argued, desperate to find a way to pass the test. "That was the point. You were supposed to look past your own interest and look after the interest of the team as a whole." Kakashi sighed and walked up to the memorial stone. On this stone are the names of the heroes who fought and died for this village. All of them understood what it took to be a ninja, sacrificing themselves to ensure that the will of fire lived on. Kakashi's voice was quiet as he spoke, the others listening intently on his words. He looked over to them. "Starting tomorrow, we'll be going over team cohesiveness. We'll be starting at 8 o'clock sharp, so don't be late." Sasuke and Sakura looked confused, with Sakura voicing her confusion. Wait, so? We passed? Her tone slightly hopeful at the end. Kakashi nodded. "Yes, lucky for you too, your teammate figured out the test right away. So, for that, it'll allow you to pass." Sakura smiled while Sasuke revealed a small smirk, both of them glancing at Daffy. Daffy chuckled at the two, listening to what Kakashi said next. "Now, we are officially Team 7. Drip, drip, drip." In a dark wet sewer, behind a massive gate, Kurama, the nine-tailed fox, was in deep thought. He thought about his container, Naruto or Daffy, whatever name the boy really went by. He had been watching him ever since the two had met 3 years ago. There was something strange about the boy, and he wasn't talking about his clothes or that creepy smile. No, it was something else. For as long as he could remember, Kurama had the ability to sense the negative emotions of others. He could sense them in every human he had ever encountered, but Naruto was different. Yes, never before had he found hate greater than his own. It was like he was drowning in it. Hidden behind that smile was a person who wanted to burn the world around him. So, why was he so friendly toward him? Ever since the two had met, Naruto would simply try and make conversation with him, never asking for his power. No, he would simply stop by, explaining the next way he had tried to bring chocolate with him but it not working for the 100th time now. Every time, Kurama would send him away, Naruto laughing as he did. Kurama could sense negative emotions, he knew there was no deceit behind their interactions. He thought back to the old mont's words, about the one who would reunite the tailed beasts and bring them to the proper path. He wondered if the only person who could reunite them was one who had suffered the same pain as them, and shared the same hate. Kurama laid his head down, closing his eyes. He dreamed of a blood-red moon, and a tall, strangely dressed man standing before it. Whether the man was stopping or causing it, he couldn't tell. He walked through the dark underground corridor, his heart pounding in his chest as fear began to tighten its grip around him. He was getting closer now, his anxiety and fear climbing as he approached him. Soon enough, he was at his door. Gulping audibly and preparing himself, he opened the door, walked in and bowed. He sat in his throne, his complexion pale as he stared with his snake-like eyes. His ink-black hair falling past his shoulders. This was the man that he had served, the man he abandoned the Leaf Village and his fiancée for, something he was beginning to regret. "Lord Orochimaru," he greeted. Orochimaru smiled at him, then he spoke, his voice was soft, with an allure that simply drew you in, forcing you to listen. "Mizuki, why are you here? Were you successful in your mission?" Mizuki gulped, and gave his report. "No, Lord Orochimaru. The scroll of seals was too well guarded. Rather than trying to steal it, I came to report someone who might be of interest to you." Mizuki, who was still bowing, didn't dare look at Orochimaru's face, terrified at what he might find. He chuckled slightly. "Oh? Please, do go on." Mizuki, steeling himself, continued his report. "There has been a recent graduate you might take an interest in, my lord, the Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails. The 9 tails? Orochimaru asked, curious. Yes, my lord. He was recently made a genin, and his skills are far above even Sasuke Uchiha, the one you ordered me to keep tabs on. The chamber was silent for a moment, before Orochimaru's voice returned. Is that so? He said, his voice holding a small amount of wonder. Excellent work, Mizuki. Mizuki smiled, happy that he had satisfied Orochimaru after failing his mission. He looked up. Thank you. The last thing Mizuki saw was a white snake flying toward his neck.